What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto marries Ahsoka? Council bashing. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Naruto was walking through Konoha, head down, looking depressed. He had just attempted to bring Sasuke back to Konoha, trying to keep him from being taken to Orochimaru to have his body absorbed, but he had failed. Luckily, though, Gaara was with him, so they got to talk a lot. Gaara helped him to get almost totally out of his depression, and it was just good to have a friend who knew what it was like to go through what he had in his life. Unfortunately, Gaara was returning to Suna tomorrow. After that, Naruto knew that he would probably slip into another bout of depression. Meanwhile, laser fire was flying everywhere, and Anakin Skywalker was having a hard time keeping track of all of it. He deflected everything he could, but even then, some of his troops were hit. He really did hate fighting inside a Star Destroyer, especially when he was being overrun in it. He had attempted to remove the droids from General Mace Windu's ship, and allow them to escape to another destroyer, which they did, but these droids were just relentless. "Master," he heard Ahsoka yell, and he glanced back. "Snips, did you get the charges set up?" he yelled back, deflecting a rapid flurry of shots from a droideka, before dropping a stack of crates on it. "Yes, Master. We had to get out of here now. Rex, get your men out of here now, and head back to the ship. Ahsoka and I will try and lead the incoming ships onto the planet below, and take them out there." Rex saluted, and led his men out of the fire. Anakin and Ahsoka managed to make it back to the twilight, and shot down to the unknown planet below. Back in Konoha, "Yo, Gaara," Naruto yelled as he saw Gaara walk by. "I gotta show ya something." Gaara nodded, and followed up to the top of the Hokage monument. They both just lied down on the ground, and stared up at the stars. "Dude, whenever I feel sad or anything, I just find it relaxing to lie on the ground and stare up at the stars. Someday, I'm gonna find out just what is past them, and I'll see everything I can see." Gaara looked over and grinned. "Count me in, man." They grinned, and shook on it. "Someday, we'll show them all. We may be demons to them, but we'll be heroes someday." They looked back at the sky, and suddenly saw what seemed like thousands of streaks crossing their field of vision. They both made a wish, and without even saying it, they both knew that they were wishing for the same thing: to finally become what they were destined to be, heroes. On board the Twilight, Anakin was quickly checking over all the charts he had, but unfortunately for him, this place was too far deep into the outer rim for any mapmakers to visit. He ground his teeth in frustration. If he didn't aim his trajectory, he could easily crash into a mountain, a lake, a town, a city. He was about to aim when a shot hit the ship. The twilight jerked, sending Ahsoka flying into the controls, sending them rapidly spinning through the atmosphere. Try as he might, he could not level out with a smoking engine. "Can't you level this out, Master?" Ahsoka yelled, as she tried to pick C-3PO off the deck. "I'm trying. You kind of jammed the gears," he yelled back. He pulled out a fusion cutter, and quickly removed the surface board. He changed a few wires, and managed to level them out just long enough to change their trajectory. His scans showed that there were no droids whatsoever on this planet. It did, however, have massive life form readings. "Master?" Ahsoka asked, suddenly quiet. "Do you feel that?" Anakin reached out in the Force, and sensed two massive Force signatures. The planet was loaded with minor fluctuations, but in all his years as a Jedi, he had never felt something so powerful. "Yeah, Snips. Wherever we are, I think we might be getting into something big here. And, as Obi-Wan would say, I have a bad feeling about this." Hokage's stone monument. Naruto and Gaara jumped as they saw one of the shooting stars suddenly jerk, and start heading towards them. "Gaara, you think you might be able to stop that thing?" Naruto frantically asked, looking for anything that might help them. "Maybe, but it would require my transformation, and I'm not going to do that," came the reply. A sudden bout of inspiration struck Naruto, and he sliced his finger open with his tooth. He started flying through the familiar seals, and, beckoning Gaara, slammed his palm on the ground, yelling out, summoning jutsu. They stood on Gamabunta's head, and as Gaara started creating sand to form a wall, Naruto had to deal with the chief's usual greeting. Once that was done, Bunta made a plan to slice up the meteor, which Naruto would then explode with tags, and Gaara would catch with his sand. The only thing left to do was wait. Twilight. They were coming in far too quickly for Anakin's comfort, and it didn't help to have 3PO go into his usual rant. He just snapped, "3PO, would you please just shut up? We are not going to die." The deck went silent, except for the alarms. Anakin pulled hard on the controls, and managed to pull the ship level, flying over a large village toward a giant toad. "Master, what is that?" Ahsoka yelled, grabbing her lightsaber. "I don't know, but hold on," he yelled, banking the twilight hard to the left. It was not a moment too soon, either, as a large sword slashed through where they had just been. A small streak went flying as well, followed by a huge shockwave. Anakin managed to land the ship, and, lightsabers ready, the two Jedis ran into the field. Naruto and Gaara stared at the two figures. One of them was a normal human, like them, holding some strange, glowing blue sword-like object. The other, she was new to them, to say the least. They had never seen anyone with what appeared to be tentacles coming off their head, and she appeared to be orange. However, they didn't have long to admire her features before she charged them with a green version of the sword. Naruto performed the familiar shadow clone seal, but before he could perform the attack, he and Gaara went flying back from some unknown force. They rolled back up, and Naruto threw an exploding tag near the girl. She jumped away just before it exploded. He noticed Gaara's sand slowly creeping up on the two, and was wondering why the man hadn't done anything but stretch out his palm toward them. Just as the girl charged again, Gaara's sand shot up, encasing them in his sand coffin, only their heads showing. Gaara glanced over, silently asking if he should kill them. Naruto held out his hand, and Gaara slowly lowered them to the ground, keeping them encased, out of paranoia. "What do you want with us?" Naruto asked, glancing between the two. They had both dropped their swords, so Naruto created two clones to grab them and bring them to him, much to the surprise of the two, for lack of a better word, people. He looked over the swords, as the girl screamed, "Give us back our lightsabers, you jerks." "Ahsoka," the man yelled, obviously cross. "Insulting our attackers is not the smartest move here. They could probably kill us with all this sand," he said, shuddering. "Anakin, please don't," she said, noticing Gaara's look. "God, I hate sand." Gaara glared at Anakin. "What do you mean, attackers?" Naruto asked. "You attacked us, you sent that giant, whatever it is flying at us, and then you charged us with these lightsabers, did you say? You're the one who attacked us with that giant toad." Ahsoka yelled, struggling to escape from the sand. Gamabunta looked furious. "This toad has a name, you know," he said in his grumbling voice. Ahsoka looked at it in fear, while Anakin nodded, and politely asked, "What is your name, Great Toad?" "Gamabunta," came the reply. Right then, several escape pods came careening down towards them. "Friends of yours?" Naruto asked as they landed. "No, those are droid pods," Ahsoka yelled, desperately trying to free herself. The hatches opened, and the droids came charging out. They shot off a blast at Naruto, who, by instinct, activated the lightsabers and deflected the shots. He looked surprised as it killed the droid, and decided to see how good he was with a sword. He charged the droids and, using both lightsabers, quickly made short work of them. Anakin looked at the blonde in complete awe. He had never before seen a lightsaber, and he was using both his and Ahsoka's as if he were an old pro. Nobody, not even himself, had been that good when they started. A thought struck him, and, reaching out, he confirmed that the force signatures he detected earlier were coming from the two boys. He saw the redhead using sand to crush some of the droids. These two would make powerful Jedis, he thought. If we survive this, I'm taking them with us back to the temple. Naruto was amazed at the way the two lightsabers felt in his hands. They were heavier than most objects their size, but being a shinobi, he had trained for things like that. He found it interesting that there was no counterbalance, and that the blades seemed to be pure chakra. A droid appeared from behind him, and with just 3 slashes, the thing was scrap at his feet. He did indeed have a little difficulty using both blades at the same time, something he figured he should probably work on, as there were hundreds of sword fighters roaming the lands. A few droids were sneaking up on Gaara, and, in a flash, he and Gaara were back to back. He handed the green lightsaber to Gaara, and as they started destroying the droids, the two Jedi were released. They managed to beat some of the droids with the same ability they had used against the two ninjas, and once the droids were finished, the lightsabers flew out of the hands of the two boys, and into the hands of their rightful owners. The two Jedi held their lightsabers level, and Anakin gave the two boys a surveying look. Ahsoka, in her fury, threw a few droid limbs at the redhead, but to their great surprise, a somewhat large amount of sand shot up in front of him, stopping the blow completely without him having so much as blinked. Anakin turned off his lightsaber and clipped it to his belt. Ahsoka grudgingly followed suit, never removing her eyes from the two boys. "You two are pretty strange shinobi," the blonde said, and Ahsoka narrowed her eyes. "What are shinobi?" she asked. "Is that supposed to be an insult?" The boys looked at each other and blinked. "You mean, you're not shinobi? Then what are you?" "No citizens have the powers or weapons you do," the blonde said. "We are Jedi," Anakin said. "What are your names?" "I'm Naruto Uzumaki," the blonde said. The redhead looked at Anakin with what seemed to be a glare, and answered, "My name is Gara." The two Jedi shivered at his voice, a deep, somewhat bloodthirsty voice for a 13-year-old. "And you two are Anakin and Ahsoka, right?" Naruto asked. Ahsoka grudgingly nodded. "Well, it looks like you might be stranded here for a while, seeing as whatever it is you arrived in seems to have busted, or something. If you want, I can see if the Hokage could arrange for you guys to have someplace to stay," Naruto offered. "We would appreciate that very much," Anakin answered. He pressed a button on his wrist, and said, "Admiral Yularen, do you read me?" There was only static. "Admiral Yularen, do you read me?" he repeated, and once again, only static. The two shinobi started walking away, and the two Jedi followed. In the Hokage's office, Tsunade was super pissed. She had just sent out the best shinobi she could spare, and they had all almost been killed. She now had to try and figure out what was going on, and why Sasuke had almost killed his best friend. She heard a knock on the door, and took a deep breath, and exhaled. "Come in," she called. Naruto and Gaara walked in, with two people in tow. One of them was a human, but the other one, she had never seen anyone that looked quite like that before. Before she could try and figure out what the girl was, however, Naruto decided to speak up. "Hey, Granny," he called, moving his hands behind his head in his reclining lean, that big, dopey grin on his face. Tsunade contemplated slamming him through a wall, but decided otherwise, for the moment. "Gaara and I were on the Hokage monument when these two Jedi came shooting out of the sky. We captured them, got attacked by the Jedi's enemies, and destroyed them. Since their only method of transportation is busted, I was wondering if you might be able to find them someplace to live for a short while." Tsunade blinked, and looked at the two in question. "Jedi?" she asked, confusion obvious on her face. Anakin nodded. "The Jedi are peacekeepers throughout the galaxy. We travel all over, trying to help worlds that have difficulty keeping peace for themselves." Tsunade looked even more confused. "What do you mean, help worlds?" she asked. Anakin sighed. This was going to be a long night. 6 hours later, Anakin kept slamming his head into a wall. He knew from what he could deduce about this woman that she was smart, but no one on this planet seemed to understand that their planet was not the only one, and that there were in fact other forms of life out in the galaxy. And, oh hell, when trying to explain the concept of the galaxy, not even the simplest of terms would help them to understand. "Alright, so let me see if I got this right," Tsunade said, yet again. "You're saying that out in what we thought was just nothingness, there are actually other worlds like ours, and that each of these worlds has other people on those worlds. And not only that, they are thousands of years more technologically advanced than us, to the point where they can even visit these other worlds?" she asked. Anakin nodded, tears of happiness pouring off his face that she finally got it. "I need some sake," Tsunade said, and walked off. Anakin turned to Naruto and Gaara, who were sitting on some chairs near the side of the room. Ahsoka was asleep in one of the chairs, but the boys were staring at him, awe visible in every aspect of their faces. "I knew there was more out there," Naruto yelled, punching the air and laughing. Gaara grinned, and Anakin just stared. He had just spent 6 hours trying to explain the universe to a woman who was 50 years old, and two 13-year-olds had gotten it almost immediately, and found it exciting. "Sake is liquor, right?" Anakin guessed. Naruto nodded. Anakin turned towards where Tsunade left. "Wait for me," he yelled, charging down the hall. Naruto and Gaara stared at each other, and started laughing until they passed out. Morning. Anakin kept trying to signal the Admiral, but so far, all he had gotten was a few seconds of static, a sentence, and then, before he could respond, more static. He was walking the streets, and every now and then, he would see people leaping from roof to roof. He had expected his clothes to get him strange looks, but few people apparently saw him being away from the norm. He found this odd, and wondered what else might be happening on this planet. Another thing he found odd was the lack of thoughts he could sense. Normally in a city this size he could sense hundreds of people and read their thoughts, but here, while he could still sense the people, he could read very few thoughts. He decided to go back to the Hokage's office and see about getting the two shinobi to become Jedi. Hokage's office. Tsunade groaned, holding her head. Note to self, do not use sake to try and forget so-called spatial physics. It does not make a good combination. She heard a knock on the door. Come in, she groaned. Anakin walked in, and closed the door a little hard. Tsunade winced. Anakin grinned and said, "That's what you get for drinking." Tsunade glared at him. "What do you want, oh fearsome Jedi?" she asked, pissed off that he was toying with her. Anakin grinned again. "I actually wanted to talk to you about Naruto and Gaara. As I'm sure you know, they seem to be very powerful." Tsunade nodded. She, however, knew why they were so powerful. "Well, I wish to request your permission to take them back to the temple on Coruscant, and train them as Jedi." Tsunade blinked, and sighed. "Tell me a little bit about your Jedi temple. Then, I can give you the village's permission on Naruto. Gaara is not from this village, so I would talk to his siblings and ask, seeing as they are representatives from his village. Preferably before they leave today. And also, you have to have Naruto's and Gaara's consent if I give you permission, before just taking them. They've had some bad experiences with kidnappings, and things like that." Anakin nodded, accepting these terms, and launched into an explanation of the Jedi Order. On the Hokage monument, Naruto, Gaara, and Ahsoka stood on top of the monument, staring out over Konoha. Ahsoka was awed at the beauty of the village, and the scents that permeated the air. She saw a beautiful pink tree, and gently sniffed the blossoms. "That is a sakura tree. Although I suppose you might know it as a cherry blossom tree. This is actually very rare. If you look over it, right now it is in perfect bloom. Some people actually go their whole lifetime without seeing the beauty it shows, but we were lucky enough to see it today," Naruto explained. The three turned back toward the village, and sat on the grass. Silence permeated the area. "I suppose you're leaving today, right Gaara?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Gaara just nodded, looking back over the village. Silence once again permeated the area, before Gaara spoke up. "I will come back someday. After all, you and I have to keep our promise, right Naruto?" he asked, grinning. Naruto grinned as well, before nodding. "What was your promise?" Ahsoka asked. Naruto and Gaara turned to look at her, and answered, "To discover what lies beyond the stars, and to finally be seen as heroes, instead of demons." "Demons?" Ahsoka asked. "A lot of people don't really like us, and they tend to label us as demons because of it," Naruto answered. Technically, he didn't lie. Ahsoka nodded, and looked back at the city. "What's it like out there?" Naruto asked. She glanced at his face, and was surprised to see that he actually looked somewhat depressed. "Why don't you come with us and find out?" Anakin's voice said from behind, and the three turned around, surprise on their faces. "You mean we can go with you?" Naruto asked, excitement plain on his and Gaara's faces. "I have permission from the various representatives of your villages. Now all I need is your consent, and you too can become Jedi." Naruto and Gaara jumped into the air, laughing and grinning like crazy. Anakin nodded, and walked back to the twilight, which he had managed to repair last night after a glass of sake. Okay, it was a bottle. So what? Besides, he technically had a reason to celebrate. He had possibly just discovered, and was now bringing, two of the greatest Force users to ever live. As Naruto and Gaara walked into the twilight, they were amazed at what they saw. Wires, circuit boards, bolts, sheet metal, throttles, thrusters, engines, they had never seen anything like it. The two Jinchuriki felt like they were in a dream, about to leave the planet they were cursed on to live a life that they had only seen in their wildest fantasies. The two looked back down the ramp as it closed, looking upon their last view of their home planet for what would possibly be a long, long time. They walked into the cockpit, and saw what looked like a metallic, golden man. It turned to them, and they saw it was some kind of droid. "Hello," it said, "I am C-3PO, Human-Cyborg Relations. How may I be of service?" "3PO, Anakin said, "this is Naruto and Gaara. I'm taking them to the Jedi Temple once we regroup with the main fleet. On the way there, I want you to teach them everything you can about the galaxy. They've never met anyone off-world, so they don't really know about anything from, well, anywhere. 3PO nodded and shuffled to a compartment near the back, Naruto and Gaara tagging along behind. Ahsoka watched the trio walk away, and focused back to the controls. Master, I sense something is strange with those two. Do you feel it? She asked. Anakin frowned and slowly nodded. They are strong with the Force, but I can feel it influence them in both ways. They are full of hope, and yet, so much fury revolves around them. Master Yoda will know what exactly to do. Ahsoka grunted and focused back on the controls. She heard a slamming noise in the rear compartments, and heard screaming as sand poured out from under the door. Naruto, I'll kill you. She heard Gaara yell. Look man, I didn't mean to knock over your gourd. How much sand is in there? Anakin sighed and opened a commline. Admiral Yularen, do you read me? He waited a few seconds and heard the Admiral's voice. I read you General Skywalker. Your current coordinates? Anakin gave them. We shall rendezvous in a few minutes. Back with Naruto and Gaara. As soon as the boys went to the compartment, they started bombarding 3PO with questions, from what kind of human Ahsoka was, to what kind of Jedi they would meet. 3PO answered all their questions and more, glad to finally have someone who cared so much about his knowledge archives. After a little bit, Naruto yawned, and leaned back, accidentally knocking over Gaara's gourd. After a bit of a yelling match, they continued to question 3PO, until they both finally fell asleep. Anakin walked into the rear compartment, and knocked quietly, sensing the two boys were asleep. 3PO opened the door and said, Yes, Master Ani? We arrived with the fleet, and we're headed back to Coruscant. When they wake up, tell them that, would you? He asked calmly, still a little unnerved by the two seemingly harmless boys. Of course, Master Ani. Is there anything else I can do for you? 3PO asked. Anakin shook his head and left the compartment. As he went to his quarters, he thought about the two boys, and what the Hokage, Tsunade, had told him. He was still amazed that two young boys could be treated so harshly. He had seen some tough things when he was a slave boy back on Tatooine, but he doubted that even he would have been able to survive such horrors and maintain as far from the dark side as they were. He could sense that Gaara had at one point been far more prone to anger, but something had made him change, and he couldn't quite figure out what. He heard a knock on his door, and a moment later, Obi-Wan stepped in. I sensed that you found some possible Jedi, he stated, sitting down on the couch. Anakin nodded and sat up on his bed. I spoke to one of the planet's leaders, and they didn't know a thing about the galaxy off of their homeworld. Even worse, I heard about horrors the two grew up with, not the least of which was almost daily assassination attempts. I don't know why they were so discriminated against, but to go through all of that and not fall to the dark side, he trailed off. Obi-Wan nodded, having known several people like that himself. Do you know anything of their fighting styles? He asked, knowing of the droid raid. Anakin nodded. The red-haired one, Gaara, was using a defensive style similar to yours, Master, but it was obvious neither has ever held a lightsaber or a similar weapon before in their lives, and he does not know what your style is. As for the blonde, Naruto, his was a highly offensive style, but it was more like merely swinging my lightsaber around. He was efficient though. Many of his attacks would slice a droid, and on the backswing would deflect a shot from their rifles. He didn't make a single wasted move. Obi-Wan leaned back on the couch, a thoughtful expression on his face. If Gaara was using a Soresu style, then he may be the apprentice I've been looking for to replace you, but I don't know who would suit Naruto. You are already training Ahsoka, and I don't know about the council, but one thing is clear to me. He can definitely be more powerful than many of the Jedi Knights, both of them could be. It seems that only the best could train them. I will contact Master Yoda when we are in range, and ask him to meditate on this. He sat up, and left Anakin's room, oblivious to all but his own thoughts. Naruto sat in what appeared to be a field of snow, a peaceful and silent place. He stood up, and looked around him, noticing a figure dressed in a cloak about 100 meters away. He heard a cute, girlish laugh, and the figure turned and started to run. He tried running after her, until something landed in his path. 3 figures appeared, dressed in black, hooded cloaks. There was a man whose face was covered beyond recognition in a web of wrinkles, a man with a strange, black armor-like suit, and a young man, panting in front of them. Naruto watched as the young man raised his face, and jerked back when the face he saw was his own, the Nine Tails transformation apparent on his features. Naruto jerked forward, panting heavily as he grabbed onto a steel bar next to him. He saw a man watching him, dressed in what he assumed were Jedi robes, as he saw a lightsaber hanging at his waist. The man had somewhat unruly hair, and had a beard. "Your name is Naruto, correct?" he asked, in an accent Naruto had never heard before. Naruto nodded, and slowly got up, his limbs shaking. The man walked over to him, helping him regain his balance. "My name's Obi-Wan Kenobi," he said, stepping back once Naruto got his balance. "What was that?" Naruto asked, his body covered in chills. "I'm guessing you had a vision through the Force. It's an ability that all Force users could use, but it's still rare for it to actually happen." "A vision of what?" he asked, still feeling his heart hammering in his chest. "You tell me," Obi-Wan said. Naruto took a calming breath, and once he could properly speak, repeated his vision to Obi-Wan. The older man looked thoughtful, and asked, "Can you tell me anything about whether or not any of this was familiar?" Naruto shook his head, and replied, "Only my own face." Obi-Wan looked as though he had thought as much, and said, "If that is the case, I believe it would be a vision of the future. From what you described, I think that in this vision, you were facing off against two Sith on a planet covered in snow, but I can't imagine which one. There are many. And as for the Sith, this bodes very ill. I know of only two living Sith, and neither fit your description." Very curious. He walked out of the room, leaving Naruto looking confused. Gaara started to stir, and also shot up, gasping for breath and shaking. Upon questioning Gaara, Naruto learned that they both had had some kind of vision involving the two Sith. The only difference was that Gaara hadn't chased a girl, and it was on a sand-covered planet. "Attention all personnel," a voice said over the intercom of the Star Destroyer, making everyone pause. "We are now approaching Coruscant. Our ETA is approximately 20 minutes. Thank you." The two boys suddenly felt a surge of fresh energy as they realized that they were both about to reach the place where all their past discriminations were about to be forgotten. They were about to find a place where they belonged. They both felt the same. They were about to arrive home. As Naruto and Gaara stared out the viewport of the Venator-class Star Destroyer, the first thing they noticed was the pattern of strange orange circles covering the planet. When they finally were through the atmosphere, both boys gasped, a slack-jawed expression of disbelief on their faces. The planet was a hotbed of activity, and despite the fact that it was nighttime, hundreds of ships shot through the skies, and thousands of nightclubs cast their neon glow throughout the streets. "The first time I saw Coruscant, I felt the same thing," a voice behind them said, and the two turned to see one of the clones, a man wearing blue-streaked armor, a kama on his legs, and a single pauldrons, along with a rangefinder on his helmet. When he removed the helmet, the two boys were slightly surprised to find he was blonde, a strange occurrence when everyone was meant to look exactly the same. Naruto noticed that he had two unfamiliar weapons at his waist, and asked the man what they were. "They're DC-17 hand blasters," he replied, and, extending his hand, said, "And I'm Captain Rex." The three shook hands before turning back to the view. The ship finally touched down, and Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan appeared, bringing them through a maze of platforms, streets, buildings, until they reached another platform with a few unfamiliar ships. "What are these?" Naruto asked. "Jedi starfighters." "What kind?" Gaara asked, his face displaying obvious appreciation. "They're Delta-7 Ether Sprite-class light interceptors," Ahsoka replied, casting occasional glances at the two boys. The three Jedi entered their ships, while Naruto and Gaara stood in, looking at the ships sullenly. Ahsoka turned to them. "What are you doing?" she asked, her impatience obvious. "We can't fit in there," Naruto murmured, shifting his feet nervously on the platform. Ahsoka rolled her eyes. "Then get on the speeders," she said, motioning behind her. The boys craned their necks to see, and saw two machines. They somewhat resembled the old bicycles they had seen back on their homeworld. The frame was covered with tan plates, while the seat was made out of padded leather. Two outriggers lead in front with steering vanes, while a sensor array sat in between. The two boys sat on each, getting a feel for the machines. Naruto placed his kunai case in the cargo compartment, while Gaara tightened the straps holding his gourd in place. The two boys figured out how to fire the engines, and once the starfighters shot off, they launched forward, following them on the skylanes. As Naruto felt the thrum of the engine beneath his legs, he felt a thrill of excitement he had never felt before. He let out a whoop of pure joy, corkscrewing behind the ships, hearing a sound of equal excitement from Gaara. He increased the speed, coming level with Ahsoka. "This is great," he yelled, hoping she could hear him over the roaring engines. He saw her smile, before focusing back on her controls. He sped past, feeling a strange tug on his heart. Ahsoka laughed as she saw the young blonde careening through the sky. She hadn't seen anybody that enthusiastic for a long time. Not since the war began, she thought to herself glumly, her grin fading from her face. She turned back to the controls, heading for the Jedi temple, a strange twinge in her heart. After some time, the temple finally came into view. Naruto and Gaara once again gasped, before Naruto veered over next to Gaara. "That place is a freaking fortress," Naruto shouted, pointing at the structure's ziggurat, and staring at the spires. "I've seen mountains that were smaller than that thing," Gaara replied, slowing his speeder down for descent. Naruto stared for a moment more, before descending with everyone else. He brought the speeder to a jerky halt on the landing platform, trying for a few seconds to turn the machine off. He finally figured it out, and pulled his kunai case out, strapping it around his leg. When he tried to stand, his legs buckled beneath him, and he stumbled, grabbing onto Ahsoka for support. She helped him for a few steps, before he was able to walk himself. "Sorry," he mumbled. "It's all right," she replied. "It's your first time riding a speeder. It takes a little getting used to." He cast a glance at Anakin, and to his chagrin, saw him roll his eyes, while Obi-Wan just grinned and shook his head. As Naruto and Gaara walked through the halls of the temple, they saw hundreds of things they had never dreamed of. Strange statues lined the halls, and even stranger people walked them. Some had tentacles, some had horns, and some were covered from head to toe in fur. Then there were the colors. Red, white, purple, blue, black, orange, hundreds of colors made up the skin of the Jedis. Before too long, they stood in front of a large durasteel door. "Wait here," Anakin said to the two, walking toward the door. He turned back, before glaring at Ahsoka. "You too." He turned, and walked through with Obi-Wan. Ahsoka sighed, and sat down on the floor next to the door, leaning against the wall with a huff. Naruto flopped down next to her, and Gaara set down his gourd, sighing with relief as he removed the weight from his back. "So what exactly are these?" Naruto asked, pointing to the horn-like protrusions on Ahsoka's head. "Montrals," she replied, "and these are Leku," she said, pointing to her headtails. "Cool," Naruto said, leaning back against the wall again. He closed his eyes, reveling in the silence. "Peace is a lie. There is only passion." His eyes shot open, and he turned his head, searching for the source of the sound. "Through passion, I gain strength." He shot up, instantly in a fighting stance, frantically searching for the sound. "What is it?" Ahsoka asked, slightly afraid of the blonde's expression. "Through strength, I gain power." He jerked back, breathing as though he had received a blow. His breath came in pants, and he kept searching, like a wounded animal surrounded by predators. He could hear Ahsoka pound on the door, yelling for the council, while Gaara grabbed his arms, slamming him into a wall. "Through power, I gain victory," he roared, slamming Gaara into the opposite wall, clawing at his stomach, his seal burning. He could feel the Kyuubi raging, and he fought to keep it down. He felt his canines lengthen slightly, and his eyes took on an amber hue. He groaned in pain, fighting against his burning body to keep the fox in check. He barely heard the council race through, staring at him with lightsabers drawn. "Through victory, my chains are broken." He saw fear and recognition appear on their faces, and it dimly occurred to him that the words must have passed from his lips. Anakin's eyes narrowed, and his grip on his lightsaber tightened, while Obi-Wan looked at him with a calm expression. With his last remaining strength, he slammed the fox back into its cage, the offensive features disappearing. He felt his lips form a few last words before he lost consciousness. "The Force shall set me free." Ahsoka stared at the young shinobi lying on the floor, surrounded by a small semicircle of councilmen. Obi-Wan knelt beside the young man, checking him for anything that might be wrong with him. Gaara slid to the ground panting, holding his bruised shoulder as he grit his teeth. She could tell from his expression that whatever had happened to Naruto had likely happened to him as well. For a second, she had thought she saw a strange purple mark appear on his arm, but it had disappeared just as quickly. "Ahsoka," Anakin barked out, and she instantly stood at attention, hearing the seriousness in his voice. "Take Gaara into the meditation chambers, and keep a close eye on him. Don't let him leave until we've sorted this out." Ahsoka nodded, and gently touched the redhead's arm. Gaara stood, and followed her as she walked away. After traveling through the maze of hallways, she reached the rooms, bare and shadowed, giving the place an eerie feel. Gaara sat down on the floor, shaking as he gripped his arm. Ahsoka stood by the door, saying nothing for some time. After she finally collected her thoughts, and opened her mouth to speak, she heard Gaara mumble just 5 words. "We're not what you think." She focused on him, and asked, "Then what are you?" One word passed his lips, before he launched into a story that he had never told anyone. Jinchuriki. Naruto felt a strange sensation as he opened his eyes. He felt as though he was everywhere and nowhere at once. He saw thousands of lights, dim and burning in equal measure. He tentatively reached out, and gently touched one. Instantly, a blaze of images shot before his eyes. He could see a young man wielding dual lightsabers fighting on a water-soaked platform against the robotic man he had seen in his vision on the destroyer. He was slammed against the rain-slicked durasteel, holding a pillar inches from his throat as he was pushed toward the edge. He threw one at his attacker, and created a circle of what Naruto somehow recognized as lightning rods. He lifted an arm, and a bolt of lightning struck the circle, bouncing between and becoming greater and greater in power, before flying toward his outstretched fingers. The man roared, and lifted his other arm, blasting the inferno toward Robo-Man, forcing him to kneel. He brought his other arm forward, and moved in a deadly dance, arcing lightning repeatedly into the man until a harsh mechanical wheezing filled the air. Naruto gasped, jerking away, back into the swirling vortex. He reached for another light, before flying into another vision. He saw a middle-aged Jedi wielding an emerald lightsaber fighting alongside a young boy of maybe 18, who in turn held his own sapphire blade. They fought a horned, red-skinned man covered from head to toe in black tattoos. They fought through a room full of strange white beams and dizzyingly high platforms, before entering a hall with randomly activated energy barriers. The young man fell behind as the older Jedi fought the tattooed man, before in a dirty move, the tattooed man ran him through. The young man fought hard, but was knocked into a giant hole. Just as Naruto was sure he would fall, he launched into the air, the green lightsaber flying into his hand before he bisected his opponent. As the tattooed man fell down the hole, Naruto finally got a clear look at the young man's face. He recognized young Obi-Wan. The transfer back was far smoother this time, and he felt himself gently enter the vortex yet again. The swirling slowed to a sluggish trickle, and light reflected around him, giving him the feeling of floating underwater. A single light floated toward him, and he reached out. It paused, and moved back and forth, mimicking an animal sniffing his fingers. A second later, he felt the contact, and he was submerged in another vision. He found himself surrounded by grass, gently rolling in the breeze. The stars shone through a crystal-clear sky, granting a surreal beauty. He saw 2 figures lying nude under the stars, entwined tightly together in the throes of passion. The grass and each other hid their bodies from his view. Before he faded, he recognized the rapturous faces as his and Ahsoka's. He finally came back to consciousness, finding himself inside a dark room. He could make out calm, meditative breathing, and focusing his eyes, he could make out the silhouette of a large, dark-skinned man before him. His eyes were closed, and he exuded an aura of peace. The man's eyes opened, and he nodded, noting Naruto's return to consciousness. "My name is Mace Windu," he said, his voice a deep boom in the silence. "Can you tell me what happened?" Naruto relayed the message, repeating the words he had heard in his mind. Mace's eyes narrowed. "The Sith Code," he murmured. He stood, rubbing his hands as if removing dirt. Naruto noticed they were covered in calluses, and figured they must have been from his lightsaber. "Well, Naruto," he began, looking the boy directly in the eyes, "you have created quite the dilemma for the council. You and your red-haired friend." "How so?" Naruto asked, genuine concern coating his voice. "By normal standards, you are too old to be trained in the Jedi ways." Naruto sat down, dumbstruck. He had left his home and everything else behind for the promise that he would be able to become a Jedi. Had it all been in vain? However, Mace said after a pause, "The Council has come to a decision. You will be trained in the Jedi ways, but in 1 year's time, you must take the Jedi trials to become a Jedi Knight. Under normal circumstances, you wouldn't take it for several more years until deemed ready, but based on what we have heard from Anakin, you and Gara have already passed the trials of courage and flesh. If you can complete the trials of insight, skill, and spirit, you may then join us." "And if not?" Naruto asked, worry evident in his voice. "Then we shall cast you into exile." Naruto thought for some time. He knew that he would likely be speaking for Gara and himself, and he knew that neither one would be able to give up on the dream. If this was the risk, then they would have to take it. Before he responded, a thought occurred to him, and he asked, "Are Gara and I going to be taught how to use the Force and lightsaber combat?" Mace nodded. "Gara will be apprenticed to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and will learn all that he can as fast as he can. The sooner you two learn, the sooner you can take the trials and officially become one of us." "Who will be my master?" Naruto asked. "I will," Mace replied. He stood and said, "Ahsoka will show you both where your quarters are. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask her or anyone. Train hard, Naruto, and you may be worthy of being my apprentice." Naruto sat for a few more minutes before leaving the chamber. The instant the durasteel opened, an orange blur slammed into him, and he found himself being fiercely hugged by Ahsoka. He looked questioningly at Gara, who replied, "She knows what we are." Naruto's face instantly hardened, and he gave Ahsoka a fierce stare. She stared back just as fiercely. A smile split his features, and he explained Master Windu's orders. Ahsoka nodded her consent, leading them through the temple, making sure to explain in depth as much as she could. She eventually brought them to 2 rooms. "And here is where you'll live," Ahsoka said, waving her arms at the doors. Gara sighed, saying his good nights as he opened the durasteel doors. They heard the thunk of his gourd landing on the ground, before the door slid closed. Naruto turned to enter his room, and murmured his thanks, before Ahsoka decided on a whim to say his name. He turned, and looked at her with a quizzical expression. She shot forward in a blur and wrapped him in a hug, taking him completely by surprise. He cautiously wrapped his arms around her, and they stayed there for a few seconds before Ahsoka released him. "I'm sorry for how I treated you when we first met," she said, staring at her feet. "It was rash, and had I known about your past, I would have never treated you as I did." She looked up when she heard him laugh. "Don't worry about it," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know that we're going to get along just fine," he said, barely keeping down a blush as he remembered his vision. Naruto turned, and entered his room, giving a content sigh as the door closed. He noted that the room was rather bare. It consisted mainly of a bed and dresser for clothes, as well as a small circular mat for meditation. He saw a large bag next to the bed, and, opening it up, found a wrist comlink, datapad, several Jedi garments, and a training lightsaber. A note attached to the handle said only one thing: "Until you build your own." He disrobed, and pulled on a pair of baggy black pants, and dug through, looking for a shirt. He was unable to find one he liked, so he decided to forego the shirt, and pulled on an open-chested white robe. He pulled out a few cube-like objects, and read that they were holocrons. He read for a few minutes, absorbing the information before transferring it to his datapad. He groaned when he found another note saying he was required to grow a ponytail to receive the Padawan braid, but focused his chakra. He figured out how to make his hair grow, and once he had a lock a few inches below his shoulder, stopped the flow. He created a clone, and had him braid the ponytail while he continued to read. When everything was completed, he sighed, leaning back against the wall. He decided to put the clothes away, and set his new equipment on the dresser. He stretched out on the mattress, and within moments fell asleep. When Naruto awoke, he had a brief moment of panic staring at the ceiling, before his memories from the day before caught up to him. He sat up, and stared at the training lightsaber on his dresser. "We made the first step," he thought, carefully lifting his hand. He had seen the others summon their lightsabers to them with the Force, and he reached out, trying to find it in him. He found his chakra, and felt the thrum of the kyubis. He focused further, and could almost feel the blood pulsing through his veins. He focused further, and searched his mind, looking for anything he hadn't found before. He finally found it, a deep, throbbing energy, limitless in power. He delved into it and felt everything. Billions of voices, fluctuations, births, and deaths. He focused on manipulating it into a pull, and the lightsaber wobbled for a few seconds before it launched toward him. He caught it and ignited it, holding it at arm's length to observe the object. The hilt was fairly plain. The only ornamental features were 4 orange lines circling around the blade emitter, and small grooves where his fingers would fit. The blade was a light orange and was about a meter long. He noticed that the hum was a bit different than the other blades, and looked at the various notes he had accumulated, coming to the conclusion that it was on stun. He dug through the bag of clothes and pulled on a black leather belt, tying the lightsaber onto it. He spent 10 minutes sorting through his clothes and putting them into the dresser. Upon completion, he pulled out a few holocrons and read more about the history of the Jedi and Sith. He copied some of the information onto his datapad and sat on the meditation pad. Just as he closed his eyes, he heard someone knock on the durasteel and he sighed before opening the door. Ahsoka knocked on Naruto's door and waited for him to answer while Gara stood a few feet from her, observing his new robes. He wore a simple pair of dark brown pants, along with a tan tunic and a blood-red cloak. The door finally slid open and she turned to Naruto. She stopped when she caught glimpse of his muscular chest, and for a moment forgot what she was there for in her desperate attempt to hide a blush. So this is what shinobi training does to you, she thought, feeling lightheaded. She saw a grin worm its way onto his lips, and he leaned against the frame, showing off more of his body under his white robe. She shook her head and said, "Master Yoda wanted me to find you too and take you to him, so he could train you in the basics of the Force." Naruto and Gara nodded and followed her, walking through the maze of hallways. They remembered the path as best they could, knowing that they would eventually lose their guide. Before too long, they came upon a room full of younglings of every species training around combat remotes while Master Yoda shuffled around, occasionally giving them instructions. They walked up to him and bowed, and awaited their instructions. Yoda hobbled around the 2 shinobi and observed them. Naruto waited and found himself a bit confused as to what the small Jedi was doing. They heard him croak, and he and Gara straightened in the shinobi bearing that had been drilled into them. "Militant, you are. Impatience, confusion I sense in you. Your purpose here, what is?" Yoda asked in his strange accent, and Naruto and Gara both softened a bit. "To be accepted," they replied in unison. Yoda nodded and gave a wheezy laugh, before asking, "To be accepted, how do you plan?" Naruto and Gara glanced at each other, before Gara spoke. "By helping people." Yoda nodded again, and hobbled toward the center of the room, while the 2 followed. Over the next several weeks, the 2 learned how to access the Force from the small master. They practiced non-stop when their lessons were over, and also learned lightsaber combat from their masters. A week after the start of training, Naruto had snuck out and infiltrated the Coruscant underground. He had found a discreet smuggler and paid him to take a long-range communicator back to his planet, telling the man the coordinates, and to give it to a Jiraiya of the Sanin. The man completed the task, and Naruto would occasionally stay up late, talking to his sensei and learning new jutsu. He discovered the ability of shadow clones to enhance training and knowledge, so while he was practicing with the Force, or learning Vapad from Mace Windu, he would have a dozen clones in his room, reading holocrons and dispelling themselves so he could learn the knowledge. Within 2 months, both boys were able to use the Force to throw their opponents, lift objects into the air, heal, pull, use a saber throw, and use the infamous Jedi mind trick. They knew a large amount of the history of the Jedi Order, and had memorized the layout of the temple. He taught Gara how to use his shadow clone training method in Vapad, and learned the Soresu style the redhead was being taught, as well as the Ataru style. From Ahsoka, he learned Sheen and Nieman. He also spent time with her, learning more about her life. He told her some of his history, and even showed her some of the techniques he knew. Her favorite by far had been the Rasengan. Everything he knew, he taught to Gara, and when Gara learned Makashi from Sindralig, the Jedi Battlemaster, he learned the form from Gara. He eventually formed hundreds more clones, sending them to secretive places throughout the temple to practice his form. Eventually, he knew all of the classic forms except for the very first. Knowing who taught it, he went to Yoda to learn Shi-Cho. He and Gara learned from the small master, and finally finished the form. It had been 3 months now, and the boys decided to practice deflecting blaster fire with the remotes. They went to see Yoda again for the practice. Ahsoka watched the exchange, and remembered her own training under the small master. She had struggled with deflecting the shots from the remotes, and found that it had been essential in learning how to use her lightsaber. She watched as the boys were given instructions, and pulled out the training lightsabers they had been issued, Naruto's orange, and Gaara's sandy yellow. The boys took a back-to-back stance, and deflected the occasional shots the remotes fired at them. Yoda raised his clawed hand, and 2 helmets with dark visors, and they landed on the boys' heads. She watched as they relaxed their stance, and could feel them reaching out with the force. They deflected a few shots, and the remote increased speed. The blades arced through the air, faster and faster until they were in a constant state of motion, throwing back dozens of bolts in as many seconds. A circle of younglings surrounded them, awestruck as 2 more remotes floated forward, sending shots at the boys. The blades moved even faster, and she saw sweat drip down the shinobi's bodies, Naruto's especially, and felt her skin tingle in excitement. The training ended with a sudden slash from both boys. Naruto's arm swept directly to the side, and Gaara brought his blade into the Ataru guard. The shots ceased, and both stood tall. Naruto slowly lowered the lightsaber, and deactivated it with a hiss, while he heard Gaara do the same. He pulled the helmet off of his head, and ran a hand through his damp hair, before wiping his forehead on his sleeve. He and Gaara both panted lightly, and he saw that Yoda was watching them, his eyes displaying just a hint of excitement. "Excellent, that was," the Green Man said to him, hobbling over. "Skilled at deflection, you are. In combat, how would fare, He motioned for the younglings to form a ring, and motioned for Ahsoka to come over. The female Togruta complied, and Yoda said, "Dual Padawan Tano, you will, Naruto." Naruto nodded, and wiped his brow again. He turned to Gaara, and asked, "Can I borrow your lightsaber?" Gaara looked surprised, but nodded, handing the blade to his friend. Gaara then moved to the edge of the ring, making sure he could watch the two. Naruto rolled his shoulders and ignited the 2 lightsabers, holding them in a reverse grip. He decided to try the Jarkai variant of Vapad. Ahsoka ignited her own lightsaber, and stood across from him. They stood for a moment, before he charged, attacking her with a backhand right slash, the speed of his attack giving the appearance of several blades. Her blade came up to meet his, and he brought Gaara's blade in his left hand toward her legs. She flipped over him, slashing at his shoulder while he sidestepped, bringing his saber to meet her in a clash of light. Ahsoka landed in a roll, and barely brought her blade up to block a double overhead slash, her arms buckling under the blow. "Hellfire, he's strong," she thought, trying to escape the saber lock. She managed to stand, and twirled to the side, deactivating her lightsaber in the process. Naruto stumbled, and she reactivated the blade, slashing at his exposed back. He somehow twisted his own body in time to block the blade, and orange met green. He jabbed at her, and she leapt back, the tip missing her stomach by mere centimeters. She landed a few steps away, and charged. She was caught by surprise when he flipped his blades into the air, grabbing his cloak and throwing it at her, before catching the blades. Smart move, Naruto, she thought, throwing the garment off of her, rather than tearing it. Naruto panted slightly as Ahsoka managed to clear herself of the obstacle, and brought her blade to his. Sweat poured off his bare torso, and he could see several of the female younglings swoon when they saw the results of the shinobi lifestyle. "Now I know how Sasuke felt," he thought grimly, strafing a counterattack. He saw Master Yoda watching attentively, and even saw several passersby stop to watch the duel. He moved faster and faster, his body drenched in more and more sweat. He saw Ahsoka moving for an overhead slash, and brought his sabers into an X, blocking the green lightsaber and effectively immobilizing it with his strength. Ahsoka tried to pull the blade away, but he maintained the pressure, before releasing it suddenly, causing her to stumble. He found an opening and smashed Gaara's lightsaber against hers, disarming her, before his own came to a halt at her throat. The younglings cheered, and Gaara nodded, acknowledging his skill. Yoda signaled the end of the match, and he licked his lips, before deactivating the blades. He tossed Gaara's to him, and summoned Ahsoka's, handing it to her. A tingle ran up his spine as their fingers touched, but a moment later it was over, and he was pulling his robe back on. Naruto, a voice boomed, and he instantly turned and took a knee before his master. I'm impressed, Mace said as he placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. I think it's time you built your lightsaber. Naruto jerked his head up in excitement, and he stood, snapping his training blade to his belt. Obi-Wan asked me to take Gaara with us, and Anakin also wants Ahsoka to build a shoto, so the four of us will leave tomorrow. Do you have any questions? Mace asked, preparing to leave. Naruto shook his head and turned to leave before saying, oh yes. Naruto, be sure to wear a shirt tomorrow. The next day, the four were in their Jedi starfighters. Naruto wore a flight suit, and in a sealing scroll he had a heavy robe, heavy pants, and a thick long-sleeved shirt. He was thrilled to finally be flying one of the ships, and opened the comm channel with Gaara. Did you ever imagine we'd be doing this when we were gazing up at the stars? He asked, gently pushing on the throttle to escape the atmosphere. If I had, I would have been committed, Gaara replied, and they both shared a brief laugh. They linked their fighters to hyperspace rings, and entered the coordinates Mace had given them. Alright, guys, Naruto said, pressing the button. See you on the flip side. The stars blurred, and he performed the jump. He took off his headset, and ran his hands through his hair. Hey, R2-D7, can you lock the controls and the overhead? I gotta change into something more suited for Ilum's climate, then I'm gonna meditate for a bit. He saw the astromech's response on the computer, and waited until the autopilot kicked on. He quickly pulled off the suit, and put on the clothing, a heavy pair of white pants, an off-white shirt, a heavy fur-lined coat, and a Jedi robe. He pulled on a cloth belt, and snapped his lightsaber onto it, before he leaned back, slowly closing his eyes. He reached out into the Force, and felt himself immersed in his visions. He saw a black and yellow-skinned Zabrak fighting a Jedi and Padawan. The man was merciless. An animal. He brutally cut down the two, before releasing an arcane roar. He saw Count Dooku fighting against Obi-Wan and Anakin, while the latter was still a Padawan. They fought against the man, and Obi-Wan was eventually incapacitated. Anakin took up his master's lightsaber, and fought against the Count. His attacks were reckless, and he eventually left an opening, allowing Dooku to remove his arm. He saw the man from his vision under Mace's gaze in a large arena. He was dressed differently, wearing a torn flight suit and wielding two red lightsabers. He saw a rancor run at the man, but noticed that it appeared to be frightful, and watched as a giant hand grabbed the creature, pulling it into a dark pit. He heard the creature scream, before its cries were suddenly cut short with a crunch of bones. A second later, a giant creature appeared, roaring like the Nine Tails. Its arms were like clubs, and it was the size of several transports. The man showed no fear, instantly sliding into a fighting stance. He opened his eyes, and saw that the ship was shaking. He grabbed the controls, and tried to veer the ship, but couldn't. His astromech was still on autopilot. He shouted for the droid to release the controls, but it was fried. He saw that what he thought was the canopy of lightspeed was actually airstream from entering Ilum's atmosphere. Flames started streaking the ship, and he heard Ahsoka over the comlink, trying to give him instruction. The ship's on auto, and my droid is fried. He heard Mace begin saying something, but his comlink suddenly blasted static, and he clawed it out of his ear. He quickly reviewed everything he knew, and decided that he would have to get out. He removed his harness, closed his eyes, and focused on the Force, trying to blast the cockpit open. His eyes shot open, and he released a surge, the Force blasting out in a sphere around him. The ship exploded, and he was instantly sucked out of the wreckage into the frozen, thin air. Sudden instinct took over, and he surrounded himself in a cloak of the Force, shielding himself from the fire and ice swirling around him. He was free-falling, and spinning out of control. By the time he regained control, he had fallen 1,000 feet, and still had several thousand to go. He could see the starfighters to his sides, and sent a force push to his right, sending him spinning toward the closest on his left. He reached out, and just barely managed to grab the slim frame. He looked in, and saw that he had grabbed Ahsoka's. She was leaning over her controls in her snow gear, crying. He rapped on the glass overhead, and her head shot up, a smile instantly blazing across her features. She started chattering on her comlink, and while she did so, his lungs were aching. He knew he was too high to breathe, and he knew he wouldn't make it down in time at this rate. He mustered up just enough oxygen to yell, "I have to jump." As he did so, he hoped she had heard him. He snapped his arms to his side, and shot down in a steep dive. He released his shield, and felt the sub-zero air against him. He had to speed up, so he released a blast of the Force, propelling him faster and faster. He kept shooting down, the seat on his body freezing. Just as his lungs were about to explode, and the edges of his vision blurred, he felt the shift, and gasped, breathing deeply. The ground was coming up fast, so he slowed himself with the Force, aiming to land on a snow-covered mountain. He knew he would still land hard, so he braced himself and slammed into the snow. His vision was covered in total whiteness, until he felt a sharp pain in his right arm, left leg, and totality of his chest, before he blacked out. Ahsoka sped toward the place where she had seen Naruto disappear, desperately trying to see past the swirling snow. She had just barely heard him yell that he was jumping before he disappeared. She had deepened the slant of the ship's dive, and barely managed to see him against the white of the snow. She saw him blur in a burst of speed, before he started to slow. She saw him disappear into the mountain. As soon as she landed, she got out, running through the snow. She heard Master Windu on the comlink, and quickly opened the channel. "What were you saying, Master?" she asked. "I was saying that the snow is too much. Gaara and I can't penetrate through it, so if you find Naruto, the two of you are alone." He cut off with a burst of static. Ahsoka swore and dug through banks of snow, desperately trying to find the blonde. She tried using the Force to blast the snow away, but the wind kept blowing it against her, chilling her body. Her fingers grew numb as she dug, but she kept going, determined to find her friend. She finally came across a spot where the snow was already slightly disturbed, and she frantically dug, screaming in triumph when she saw his hand. She pulled him out, and gasped at his appearance. His arm was covered in frozen blood, and a piece of bone jutted out near the elbow. His leg was in a similar condition, the crimson liquid staining the beautiful clothing. Worst of all was his chest, completely crushed and bloodied. She saw that his wounds were healing before her eyes. His arm snapped into place, and the leg straightened out. His chest started to expand back out as his ribs healed, and she saw his visible lungs repair the shredded tissue. She gingerly lifted him, and cast her gaze around her. She was unable to see where she had left her starfighter in the blizzard, and was incapable of seeing more than a foot or two in any direction. "This way, child." She jerked, and saw a form appear before her. She saw a white jacket with flames surrounding the bottom, a pair of blue pants she knew was shinobi in design, and blonde hair, with a headband identical to Naruto's. His face was so similar, that for a moment she believed it was a future Naruto, but she noticed the lack of the whisker-like markings. It must be his father, she thought, and trudged through the snow after him. The bid paid off, and within a few moments she found a cave. She pulled Naruto inside, and the figure stayed by the door. She gently set him down, and saw that his wounds were in the final stage of healing. His arm and leg had repaired without a scar, and his chest was fusing its skin together before her eyes. It finished the task, and again, left him without a scar. Naruto's eyes fluttered open, and she sighed in relief. He sat up, and his gaze lingered on the ghost before him. The ghost smiled, before it flickered out of existence. Naruto stretched his limbs, and felt the small itch he felt whenever he healed a major wound. "I must have broken something on the fall," he thought, rubbing his hands together. He noticed that despite the cold temperature, and his wet clothes, that he was actually about as warm as he had been in the cockpit. It must be because of the Kyuubi, he thought, peeling off the robe and coat. He reached into his shirt pocket, and pulled out a small scroll the size of his thumb. He released the seal, and pulled out enough wood to last for a few hours. He set it ablaze with a quick jutsu, and leaned back, listening to the crackle. He heard a slight sniffle, and turned, jumping when he saw Ahsoka huddled against the wall, staring at him. Ice blistered her face, and her fingers were frozen. He quickly pushed her over to the fire, and rubbed her hands, trying to warm her up. He reached for his robe, and activated the seal he had sewn on, pulling out a sleeping bag. He wrapped her in it, and kept rubbing her, trying to warm her. He sighed, and remembered something he had learned in shinobi training for such situations. In order to warm her, she would need to take off her wet clothes, and share his body heat. A blush crawled across his face, before he told her what needed to be done. She stared at him blankly, and he gently pulled off her coat. She still didn't respond, and he gently lifted her, before lowering the snow pants she wore. She was left only in her underwear and the cloth wrapping around her chest. He turned her around, and removed the garments from her body, leaving her naked. He quickly wrapped her in the sleeping bag, before he stripped down and crawled in, pressing himself against her. She was cold as ice, but he did not move. Within a few hours, her body had warmed somewhat, and Ahsoka was mumbling in her sleep. Her fingers were back to their normal color, and the ice had thawed from her face. She was still cold, so he increased his body temperature by releasing a small trickle of the Kyuubi's chakra. He felt some discomfort, but ignored it. He had to make sure that she would be fine. He started to fade into sleep, and welcomed the sweet release. Gara stood outside of a cave on another mountain, staring at where his friends had disappeared. The snow whipped his hair, and he felt sleep weigh heavily upon him. I wouldn't sleep well tonight, even if I could, he thought, rubbing his eyes. He pressed the crystal he had found, a white pontite, against his chest. When he got back to the temple, he was going to compress some of his sand into a solid crystal before synthesizing the two crystals together in order to get the sand-colored blade his current lightsaber had. He stared at the storm clouds surrounding the mountain, and sighed before heading back in to sit around the fire mace had started. I hope you are safe, my friend. Ahsoka woke up, and gingerly shifted, trying to relieve the soreness in her arms and back. She froze when she felt that she was naked, and that something was pressed against her. She reached back, and felt her fingers touch flesh. She cast a glance toward the opening of the cave, and saw that the fire had dimmed. A blush crawled across her cheeks when she saw her clothes next to the fire, Naruto's next to hers. She noticed that the clothes were slightly damp, and remembered something from her lessons. I must have been suffering hypothermia, she thought, slowly crawling out of the sleeping bag. She quickly wrung her clothes of the excess water, and sat in front of the fire. She cast a glance at Naruto. He shifted, wrapping an arm around where she had been laying, and she felt an odd tingle in her heart. I suppose I won't kill him when he wakes up, she thought, staring into the fire. Then again, losing a limb won't kill him. Gara opened his bleary eyes, and groaned when light poured into the cave. He threw a hand over his eyes, and turned over, stretching his arms. Yet another night without sleep, he thought, trying as hard as he could to keep his eyes open. He could almost hear the Shukaku laughing at him, and he lay on the stone floor for a moment, wishing his childhood had been different. He finally picked up his head, and saw Master Windu meditating near the fire. He sat down opposite, and closed his eyes, focusing on calming his raging thoughts. Focus, he thought, slowing his breathing. Let your anger go. Reach out to the Force as Obi-Wan taught you. A memory resurfaced in his mind. A week into training, he knelt across from his master, panting as he tried to keep up. His every move was blocked, and countered in the blink of an eye. You're doing well, considering you've had no training with a lightsaber, Obi-Wan said, blocking yet another attack. Gara collapsed, wheezing. His sand was unable to keep up with the master's lightning-fast attacks, and the gourd was too cumbersome. He looked up when he saw a hand enter his field of vision to see that Obi-Wan had offered to help him up. He cautiously took the hand, and was lifted to his feet by the surprisingly strong Jedi. Obi-Wan lifted his lightsaber, and spoke, saying, when I attack you like this, you have to block me like this, and proceeded to show him the block. Gara mimicked his movements, and he saw Obi-Wan smile. Good, now try and block the attack. He managed to block Obi-Wan's swipe, but his gourd threw him off balance. He growled, and tossed the object into the corner, sand spilling out. He felt relief as the weight was off, and he saw Obi-Wan lash out. He blocked and countered before the actions had even registered in his mind. He saw Obi-Wan's approving nod, and the ghost of a smile split his face. He hadn't used his gourd since, though he always kept a bit of sand with him to remind him of his home. When he mastered Sorasu, he found that his body automatically used the style to defend himself. Shukaku had lost its hold over him, and punished him by making him ever more restless. I'm going to have to do something soon, he thought. I can't go forever without sleep. He opened his eyes, and stood, walking to the edge of the cave. He turned to Master Windu, and said, the storm has cleared. I'm going to look for Naruto and Ahsoka. He turned, and leapt out into the snow. Naruto blearily opened his eyes, feeling sore from his night spent on the hard rock floor of the cave. He stretched, hearing an audible, wet pop from his spine. He felt muscles burning and rolled his shoulders before crawling out from under the blankets. He briefly remembered his nudity, but shrugged the cold off. He picked up his clothes and moved to pull them on when he noticed Ahsoka staring at him in shock in the corner of the cave. Oh, this is bad. He noticed a faint blush cross her cheeks as she stared at his body, and he allowed a sly grin to cross his features. He pulled on his underwear and pants before belting on his lightsaber. Noticing she was still staring at his chest, he decided to forego the heavy gear he had worn yesterday, as the Kyuubi seemed to keep his body temperature stable. He quickly sealed everything back into a scroll, before sealing that into his robe. He pulled the object on, and then sat across from the Togruta, staring into the flames. The reason we were naked was because you were suffering from hypothermia, he explained, predicting her question. You pulled me out of the snow, and brought me to this cave. When I saw you were incoherent and shivering, I did the only thing I could think of. Nothing happened. He saw her nod, before resting her knees on her chin. When I was bringing you here, I saw someone standing in the blizzard before me. He looked like you, and yet he seemed different. Do you know who he is? She asked, gazing into his eyes. He sat silently for a few moments, before grunting. You saw my father. You know that I grew up an orphan. Both my parents died within hours of my birth. He leaned back, sliding his calloused hands across the hard floor, before flinching, his hand cutting on a sharp object. He looked, and saw that he had cut himself on a pontite crystal. The frosty shade gave the object the appearance of snow. He pulled it out of the recess in the floor where it sat, and held it before him, marveling in the way it reflected the fire's light. His hand unconsciously reached to Tsunade's necklace, and he fingered the crystal. It seemed to give off the same frequency, and he held it next to the pontite in his hand. Looks like I found my lightsaber crystals, he thought, turning them over in his hand. I synthesized them together, and they ought to make a nice blade color. Although I have to wonder what effect they'll have on the Kyuubi. He had read that pontites had the ability to cool the skin and to cool tempers. If that were true, was it possible that he may gain control of the Kyuubi? He shook his head, clearing his thoughts while Ahsoka tended to the cut on his hand. He could sense there was still a level of awkwardness hanging around, so he broke the chain on his necklace, allowing the crystal to fall to the floor. He then proceeded to break both crystals in half, and used his chakra to fuse them into one crystal, taking on a frosty shade of green. He broke those crystals in half, before handing Ahsoka the darker of the two. She quietly accepted the crystals, murmuring, thank you. Now you'll always have a part of me with you, he said. He noticed her eyes shine for a moment with unshed tears, before she turned quickly away, pulling out the components of her shoto to assemble the weapon. He pulled out the pieces he himself had brought, and arranged them in a general layout for him to see. He planned to have a lightsaber with a handle that would glow the color of his blade when he activated it, giving it an ethereal appearance. In the center he had 4 silver rings near the activation switch, which rested on a rectangular black platform, roughly half the length of the handle, centered on the switch. The rings attached to another black platform of equal size on the opposite side, actually covering the bottom half of the handle. He had arranged a small black segment to cover the pommel, and attached a ring so he could hand it from his belt. The shroud emitter was segmented to appear as a curved arrowhead. Look at my profile page for a link. He closed his eyes and focused gently on the inner workings of the blade. The pieces floated up to eye level before him, and they slowly moved into place. The pieces fused together slowly as he meditated, saturating them with the force, and the lightsaber floated horizontally before him. He would have to meditate for some time, to complete the infusion of power to the device. He cracked his eyes open a hair to see Ahsoka doing the same. And now we wait. Garrett trudged slowly up the mountain as he looked for a sign of his friends. He had managed to find Ahsoka's ship only due to the inch of the wing that stuck out of the snow. He slowly combed over the snow, finding several places where the snow was churned up. Still nothing, he thought, kicking the snow when he failed to find any footprints. The snow was starting to affect his vision, making the white surrounding him take on a painful shade of pink. He pulled his goggles over his face, slightly annoyed that the red lenses changed it all to a red hue. He thought he saw the opening of a cave, and decided to settle in. His first impression upon entering was that it had a cramped appearance. The place was barely 6 feet wide. His second was of the stale scent that permeated the stone. He sat down and pulled out the components of his lightsaber, identical to Obi-Wan's in all but color scheme, and pulled the sand out of the pouch he kept at his side. He quickly compressed it into a crystal, and fused it with the pontite he had found, before breaking it into the two pieces required for his lightsaber. He set about creating his own lightsaber, deciding that he may wind up needing it to find his friends. Naruto stretched his cramped legs after 3 days of meditation. The blade was complete, and he stepped out of the cave, welcoming the sunlight on his face. He heard the crack of boots on ice, and saw Gaara, staring at the ground. "Gaara!" he shouted, running down the slope. The young man's head shot up, and he charged up toward Naruto. They met halfway down, and Naruto tackled him into the snow, laughing as they mock wrestled. Ahsoka watched from the mouth of the cave, her lips curving in a tired smile. "I'm gonna rest in here, Naruto," she said, stepping back into the cave. "Try not to kill each other." He waved an affirmative before ducking under Gaara's tackle. He brought his new saber to his hand, gently pressing his finger to the switch. Gaara saw the move and drew his own saber, waiting. "Care to spar, my friend?" Naruto asked, thumbing the switch. "Not yet," he thought. Gaara nodded and Naruto launched forward, activating the blade at the same moment Gaara did. The instant the blades touched, his vision went black. He opened his eyes, finding himself standing in the Chunin exam stadium in Konoha. He coughed, feeling something unclean pressing in on him. He looked around, and saw the stadium had gone black as night, leaving him surrounded by shadowy figures. He saw people surrounding him, and managed to make out a few. He saw Jiraiya, smiling at him in his usual manner. The man looked different. He had a toad sitting on each shoulder, frog-like features, and lines drawn across his face. His pupils had irises had been replaced by an orange horizontal bar, and he exuded an aura of even greater power. He saw Ahsoka, dressed in a pair of gray tights with diamonds on the and shirt with a diamond just above her more developed S, and 4 bands around her biceps. She wore fingerless gloves that extended to her elbows, and silver bracelet-type object around her wrists. At her belt were both her lightsaber and shoto. Her montrals had grown taller, and her leku now extended to her S, framing her face, giving her a more exotic look. She gazed at him, a loving smile across her features. He saw Gaara, dressed in a pair of black pants and matching combat boots. He wore a blood-red tunic, matching his hair, and a white hooded cloak with gray sleeves. His eyes had the star shape they had when he was possessed by Shukaku, but the color was the normal pale blue of his eyes. A scar crossed his left cheek, but it appeared invisible next to the smile crossing his features. A shadow suddenly fell over the three, and they slipped into a battle stance. Blue lightning arced out, striking Jiraiya squarely in the chest. Naruto yelled out as the light faded from the man's eyes. Gaara was next, a red blade appearing through his heart. Both men crumpled soundlessly to the floor, like puppets whose strings had been cut. The figure appeared behind Ahsoka, gently placing its palms across her jaw, revealing clawed fingers. It pressed its claws into her skin, causing a tear to fall from her eyes. She gazed at Naruto, and he saw her mouth, "I love you." With a sudden twist, the figure snapped her neck. Naruto roared in fury, immediately pouncing upon the being. His lightsaber in hand, he fought it violently, utilizing Vaipad to a more violent degree than he had ever used. He could feel himself dancing at the edge of the dark side, and the creature's own fury entered, cycling through his body into more and more power. He felt a blow slip past and strike his opponent's weapon arm, but it glanced off, catching him by surprise. He launched back to avoid a strike, and sent a huge blast at the figure through the force, revealing his foe's identity as his black robe flew off. It was himself. He was older and more feral. His physical appearance represented a human version of the Kyuubi, strong, compact, fast. His nails were claws, his teeth fangs, his birthmarks whiskers. His hair gave the appearance of a mane, and black and red had appeared in the blonde. He wore a pair of black pants covered by a kama like Rex's, and he wore forearm-length gauntlets, boots, and a chestplate of segmented black besker. His biceps were bare, displaying the scars crisscrossing them in a pattern similar to the lightning he could call forth. His lightsaber was unadorned save for 3 prongs sticking out, resembling claws. The Sith laughed, a deep, impure sound as he summoned his cloak. His voice sounded to Naruto like a death rattle. The Sith donned the cloak and rolled his shoulders before he spoke, "And now you see what I am." He appeared next to Naruto, slowly circling him, whispering in his ear. "Your fear, your hatred, all those things that surrounded you throughout your life, they fed me. Made me grow so strong." Naruto slashed, but the Sith disappeared in a wisp of smoke, before appearing 10 yards away. "Do you know who I am, Naruto? I am you, but only in body. Your weakness released me. I am the Kyuubi, and when I kill you here, I will finally be free." The Kyuubi launched forward, his blood-red blade gleaming with an almost tangible bloodlust. Naruto used a Soresu block, before summoning Gaara's and Ahsoka's lightsabers to him. Holding Ahsoka's, he used the Force to keep Gaara's blade attacking the Kyuubi from behind, while he used a Jarkai variant of Vaapad to attack the Sith from the front. The Kyuubi was a blur, frantically blocking and countering, yet his face remained calm. Naruto summoned Ahsoka's Shoto, and manipulated it through the Force as well, testing his abilities to their very limits. Faced with 4 lightsabers from all directions, the Kyuubi began to slowly tire. Where he couldn't block with his lightsaber, he allowed the Beskar to stop the blades. As he moved to block Gaara's lightsaber, Naruto suddenly saw a distortion appear in the center of the plate. By instinct, he moved his hand forward, channeling the Force. Upon contact, the chest plate shattered. The Kyuubi roared as pieces of shrapnel entered his bare torso, before it was suddenly cut off. He gazed down, staring at the green blade erupting through his heart. He stared into Naruto's eyes, as his body slowly began to dissolve, flowing into Naruto. As the final screams of fury were uttered, he vanished completely, and Naruto jerked. A field of chakra erupted around him, yellow in color, and he could feel the Kyuubi being forced to submit. The plane around him began to fade, and as it did, Naruto smiled. The Kyuubi had finally been brought to bear. He opened his eyes to find Ahsoka and Master Windu kneeling beside him. Gaara was a few feet away, thrashing in his own vision, and Mace quickly ran over to him. Ahsoka wrapped her arms around Naruto when Mace turned his back, and she squeezed him until he felt he would break. She let go, and helped him to his feet. "You had us worried," she said, nervously shuffling her left foot across the ground. She seemed to look everywhere but at him. "Master Windu said that you had somehow begun the trial of spirit, and that there was nothing we could do. He said that if you woke up, then you passed. So I have the trials of flesh, courage, and now spirit," he thought, his throat raw. "Now for skill and insight." Gaara suddenly jerked, and his eyes shot open. His breathing calmed, and he managed to stand on his own. When the young boy looked at Naruto, he saw that Gaara's eyes had transformed, taking the appearance they had when he was under the trial. They now appeared to be the eyes of the Shukaku, with a pale blue instead of a sandy brown. Judging from Gaara's look, his eyes had changed too, and when he looked into the ice that coated the mountain, he saw that his eyes had turned into a shocking blue version of the Kyuubi's. "I think we have stayed long enough," Mace said, and the Padawans all turned to him. "It's time we go home." As they began descending the mountain, Naruto asked, "What do I do about my destroyed ship?" "You can ride with Ahsoka. It'll be crammed, but you'll fit, so long as one of you sits on the other's lap." The two cast a glance at each other before looking away, blushing. As it turned out, Ahsoka had decided to sit on top, and Naruto was nervous beyond belief. Whenever Ahsoka moved, the confines of the cockpit would force her to grind against Naruto's groin, and he barely managed to keep from letting his feelings show. As they entered hyperspace, Ahsoka had the astromech lock the controls in case the confines caused them to bump into something. After a few minutes of silence, Ahsoka decided to break the tension. "Do you love me, Naruto?" He froze, and for a moment could have sworn he felt his heart stop. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to buy some time to think. "Does she know I love her? And more importantly, does she love me? I know I had that vision, but the Force often only shows possibilities as to the future's path. I mean, Naruto, that the Jedi Code states that we are not allowed to love. And yet, I feel that I love you. Whenever we're near each other, I feel a longing in my heart, and I need to know if you feel the same way. Do you love me?" He answered her by wrapping his arms around her waist, and pressing his lips against her neck. He heard her moan, and she leaned back, relaxing into his embrace. She managed to turn enough to press her own lips to his, and for a moment, he forgot about everything. His past, his future, his visions, and the fact that what they were doing was forbidden. Nothing existed but the two of them. "I love you, Ahsoka," he whispered into against her lips, and he felt her smile. She deepened the kiss, and the two continued, spending the remaining flight together. Inside of his office, Chancellor Palpatine sat with his fingers crossed, observing the papers before him. They were various proposals and laws the Senate wished to pass, and he narrowed his eyes, impatience coursing through him for only a moment. He was Darth Sidious, ruler of the Sith, ruler of the galaxy. He had stretched his nefarious schemes throughout decades, bringing about this exact situation one step at a time. He had not, however, counted upon the young Jedi shinobi. Naruto and Gaara had the potential to become stronger than anyone he had ever met, stronger than even his old master. Legally, there was no course he could take at the present moment. If he could set them up, frame them for a great enough crime, he could banish them from the Republic, sending them back to their planet. However, if their planet had spawned two of the greatest Force users ever known, how many more had it spawned? They two boys were the only ones known, and it was rare for a planet to have even one of their calibers. But two? He had to assume that all of these so-called shinobi had to have the potential to be a great threat to him if properly trained. A hologram of Count Dooku appeared before him, and he waited as the Count took a knee before him. "My master," Dooku said in his noble voice. "I believe that I have discovered information that will allow us to discover the true potential of the newest pawns in this game. Speak, Tyrannus." Back on Naruto's homeworld, a group of holograms stood arguing inside a dark and depressing cave. A voice raised above the din, saying, "The Kyuubi has escaped the planet, and worse, so has the Shukaku. Our plan requires them to be captured in order, and if we can't get the Shukaku, how can we get any of the others?" A figure with ringed eyes turned to face him, and the others quieted at the silent fury of his gaze. "We have ways to get them back, Deidara. Let them believe they are out there, aiding the galaxy. As they do, their own world shall descend into darkness. And they will come." Naruto and Ahsoka finally separated in the cockpit of the fighter, and a few moments later, they left lightspeed. They paused for a moment, before Gaara blinked into existence and Mace a moment after that. They re-entered Coruscant airspace, and Naruto sighed, comforted by the familiar scenery. He stared out of the cockpit as Ahsoka focused on landing. They landed shortly after, and as the cockpit opened, they both tried to climb out, tumbling onto the deck. Naruto groaned, feeling his numb legs, where Ahsoka sat on him. Ahsoka's rear was numb from having to sit on him. He managed to stand, his legs wobbling, while Master Windu began relaying orders. "You all have done an excellent job, and in very difficult circumstances," he said, the three Padawans standing before him. "I am very proud of each and every one of you. You can have a week off to rest from your ordeal." With that, he walked away, likely leaving to give a report to the council about the boys' trial. The three turned to each other and began debating what to do. Ahsoka suggested that they rest, while Gaara and Naruto wanted to continue their sparring where they left off. Ahsoka sighed, before saying, "I guess I might as well join you two then. Let's go to the sparring ring then." She began walking, followed by Gaara, then Naruto, who found himself staring at the sway of her hips. Holy hell, he thought, feeling a slight blush. How does she walk like that? He had to force his eyes away as they entered the halls, passing by many different Jedi. Several noticed the change in the two young men, not only their new eyes, but the fact that they held themselves taller, prouder. He thought he heard one of them, a Mon Calamarian, say, "They must have passed the trial of spirit." They finally reached the sparring ring, and the three took up a fighting stance, forming a triangle. With a flourish, the three activated their lightsabers. Ahsoka held hers in a reverse grip, Gaara held his in a classic Soresu stance, and Naruto, deciding to throw them off, slipped into a block he had learned from Jiraiya on his communicator, called the Rising Eagle. It was normally for katanas, but it would work on a lightsaber. He raised his blade directly over his head, the pommel 6 inches diagonally above his forehead. The three waited for someone to move. Ahsoka narrowed her eyes, before dashing forward at Naruto, slashing at his hip. He flicked his wrist, and the blades met in a clash of sparks, before he twisted around her, slashing at Gaara within the span of a second. The redhead blocked, twisting his lightsaber to also block Ahsoka, and the three blades pressed against each other, the opposing forces preventing anyone from moving. They stepped back, disengaging, before Naruto blocked a downward slash from Gaara, bending at the waist. Gaara lost his balance, and Naruto twisted, allowing Gaara to fall forward. The redhead rolled, and came up, blocking a slash from Ahsoka. He deactivated his lightsaber, and it was Ahsoka's turn to fall. She landed on her stomach, and rolled to the side to dodge a slash from Naruto before jumping to her feet. The two lunged at each other, and twisted as they locked together. They pulled apart, and jumped back in, Gaara watching, waiting. They moved around each other in a dance only they knew, their skin a hair's breadth away, before momentum would pull them apart. They were completely aware of each other, their sweat, their pulse, the hidden lust only they could see. It had more passion than any kiss, more fire than the burning weapons in their hands. Every sense was heightened. Naruto could see every hair on their skin, hear the pounding of their hearts, taste the scent of her skin, smell the sweat coating their limbs, and above all else, feel the rhythm of their duel. They separated one last time before Gaara suddenly closed in, batting aside Ahsoka's defenses with a well-placed slash, twisting to block Naruto, and kicking Ahsoka in the stomach, knocking her out of the ring. There was no dance between the two shinobi. Theirs was pure violence, reminiscent of two lions clashing again and again. Naruto could feel power thrumming through his lightsaber as he performed the Vaipad style. His own power, coupled with Gaara's own, strengthened each blow, and the output of power to block each blow was added, increasing the power exponentially. Gaara, however, was able to hold his own with Soresu guards, before he would switch into Vaipad himself. If they were any other Jedi, they would have killed each other long ago. Even so, they collected a series of small scratches, bruises, stains, and burns that healed almost instantly, leaving behind nothing more than a mark on their clothes. Naruto and Gaara did not tire, for the Biju in their bodies fueled them, making their endurance greater than that of any other. Naruto knew that their contest would be decided upon speed, the one place where his Vaipad usage was superior to Gaara's. When Naruto had taught Gaara Vaipad, the young Jedi had learned it like he had learned all the other styles, via the shadow clone training method. The problem, however, was that while the clone may retain knowledge, it did not retain muscle memory, and therefore, had to be practiced. Naruto had practiced all the styles as best he could, for he was allotted a small amount more free time, due to his master's place on the High Council. Obi-Wan was usually fighting with the troops, or teaching Gaara, so the redhead did not have that advantage. He moved faster and faster, his blade taking on the appearance of a wave of light, several blades appearing in the afterimage. His entire body was a blur as he attacked, his arms forcing power into the handle, his feet moving to provide stability, and the muscles on his back forcing power to the rest of his body. Gaara started to falter, unable to keep up with the sheer speed of Vaipad, before he was forced to switch back to Soresu, his main technique. Now that Gaara's offense was weaker, Naruto smashed against him, a vibration traveling up his arm with every blow. At last, the moment came, and the very tip of his lightsaber dipped past Gaara's guard. He twisted the blade, and with one final flick of his wrist, sent Gaara's lightsaber flying from his hand. With another flick, his was resting an inch from Gaara's throat. Gaara's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile, before he raised his hands in surrender. Naruto lowered his blade, and deactivated it before extending his hand. The two shook, and heard cheering erupt around them. Turning, they saw a group of around 50 younglings, 20 Padawan, 70 knights, and 10 masters surrounding them. They recognized a few of the faces, and gave an embarrassed wave, before Ahsoka stepped up and shook their hands. Deciding to humor the assembled Jedi, Naruto grasped her hand, as well as Gaara's, and bowed, bringing the other two to bow with him. As the Jedi clapped, they bowed twice more, before stepping down from the ring. "Very impressive, you three," a voice said, and they turned to see Anakin walking toward them. Naruto felt a brief bout of panic, before he remembered that no one knew about how he and Ahsoka felt. They had only found out mere hours before. Naruto and Ahsoka politely exchanged pleasantries with the Jedi Knight, while Gaara was speaking to Master Shakti. Naruto finally managed to excuse himself, and just about ran from the room. When he was finally free, he entered his room, digging around through his equipment. He finally managed to find his long-range communicator, and locked his door before activating the device. He waited for a few moments as it tracked down his home planet, Coronia, before Jiraiya finally picked up on his communicator. "Naruto," he exclaimed, happiness etched onto his features. He had a woman hanging on each arm, but Naruto knew that the happiness was directed at him. "It's good to finally hear from you again. How have you been doing? Have you mastered those jutsu I sent you yet?" "Jiraiya," he said, having gotten into the habit of calling him by name after he had become a Jedi, "I need to talk to you in private about the fox." Jiraiya's expression instantly grew serious, and he turned to the women, sending them away with a quick word. He performed a few seals, soundproofing his room, before saying, "I'm being watched. We have only 5 minutes before this comlink can be tapped. Go." Naruto launched into the story of his trial of spirit, explaining how his Sith form had been a materialization of the Kyuubi, and finishing with the change in his appearance. "It feels like I'm still undergoing changes," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "My healing factor has sped up even more, my canines are already a few millimeters longer, and I feel like my muscular structure is being subjected to some kind of, I dunno, it's like it's being amped up." Jiraiya frowned, writing the info on one of his ever-present notepads. "I see. And you said Gaara also defeated the Shukaku?" 50 seconds. Naruto nodded, saying, "His appearance has also changed to more closely resemble Shukaku. Do you know anything about this?" Jiraiya paused, obviously ordering his thoughts, before replying, "It seems to me that you too have taken control of your Biju. It's not possible for a Jinchuriki to do so, but I only know of one who has ever done so. I have to go now, Naruto. Only 10 seconds left." Naruto said goodbye, before switching off the link. He sighed, leaning his head against the wall of his room. He thought about his life, and memories of magical nights spent under the stars came to him. A gentle tune floated through his mind, and he softly sang the words as they came to him. "Nighttime sharpens, heightens each sensation, darkness wakes and stirs imagination. Silently the senses abandon their defenses, helpless to resist the notes I write. For I compose the music of the night." A thoughtful look appeared on his face, and he continued, writing the words down as he sang them. Ahsoka finally managed to slip away from her master, before walking casually toward Naruto's room, intent on seeing him again. She passed several knights, and gave them a polite nod, betraying nothing of her secret mission. She finally reached his door, and raised her hand to knock, before she heard gentle singing. She paused, and, looking around to make sure no one was there, gently pressed her ear to the door. Slowly, gently, night unfurls its splendor. Grasp it, sense it, tremulous and tender. Hearing is believing, music is deceiving, hard as lightning, soft as candlelight. Dare you trust the music of the night? She placed a hand over her heart, and for some reason, felt a stirring there stronger than any before. He's singing about his life, she realized, and pressed her ear back to the door. Close your eyes, for your eyes will only tell the truth, and the truth isn't what you want to see. In the dark, it is easy to pretend that the truth is what it ought to be. She quietly opened the door and saw him sitting on his meditation mat, hunched over a sheet of paper. She gently sat down next to him, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. He relaxed, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling him move with each breath. Together they sat, listening to the words as he sang them. Softly, deftly, music shall caress you, fear it, feel it, secretly possess you, open up your mind, let your fantasies unwind, in this darkness which you cannot fight, the darkness of the music of the night. Naruto's face changed slightly, and his voice rose, becoming stronger and stronger. Close your eyes, start a journey to a strange new world, leave all thoughts of the world you knew before, close your eyes, and let music set you free. Only then can you belong to me. His voice softened, and he turned to her, lacing his fingers with hers. Floating, falling, sweet intoxication. Touch me, trust me, savor each sensation. Let the dream begin. Let your darker side give in to the power of the music that I write, the power of the music of the night. They gently kissed, and he pressed his forehead to hers, before singing softly. You alone can make my song take flight. Help me make the music of the ni-g-g-g-h-h-h-t-t-t-t. As the last echo faded from his room, Ahsoka released a content sigh, before gently capturing his lips with her own. They kissed for a few minutes, before they broke apart, falling into a comfortable silence. "When I was little," Naruto suddenly said, breaking the silence, "I was hunted every year on my birthday, except for one. Last year I turned 13, it was my last year as a shinobi, and I was on a mission when my birthday rolled around. Most shinobi in the village would have hated being on a mission on their birthday, away from the ones they loved. But what did I care?" he said, giving a dry chuckle. "I grew up an orphan. Even if I was able to stay home on my birthday, there would have been no one waiting for me. And if I was out of the village, then I would be hunted. I didn't mention it to anyone, but something interesting happened anyway." Naruto sat at the top of a grassy hill, staring at the stars overhead. It was October 10th, his birthday, and the 13th anniversary of the Kyuubi's defeat. He smiled for a moment, glad to finally have a birthday where he wouldn't wake up in the hospital the next day. He gently inhaled, smelling the refreshing scent of the sea. His current mission had brought him to a harbor to guard a ship carrying products for Konoha from the usual pirates and highwaymen. The party had camped for the night, and Naruto had walked to the top of a cliff in order to see the skies. "All alone on your birthday?" a voice asked, and Naruto nearly fell off his ledge before he recognized the voice as Kakashi. He sighed, picking up one of the pebbles by his hand and throwing it out over the waves. He heard a grunt as Kakashi sat down next to him. He moved over a bit to give the Jonin more room, and they stared up at the stars. After a few minutes, a warm light entered the corner of his vision, and he looked to his right. He wasn't prepared for what he saw. Kakashi had pulled out a small plate, and, at some point on the mission, had apparently bought a cake the size of his fist. The cake sat on the plate, and a solitary candle impaled it, burning brightly despite the darkness. Looking up, he saw that Kakashi was smiling at him, and the look in his eye was one Naruto imagined a father might give his son. "Happy birthday, Naruto," the Jonin said. Naruto accepted the cake and a tear appeared at the corners of his eyes. He blinked, and wiped his nose, not wishing to appear weak in front of his sensei, but Kakashi's eyes softened even more. He patted Naruto on the shoulder, and stood, leaving him to eat in peace. When Naruto finished his story, Ahsoka had tears in her eyes, and he wondered for a brief moment how Kakashi was doing. "I'll ask next time I talk to Jiraiya," he thought. That, or I could try and send a communicator to Kakashi. But then again, it was such a risk to get one to Jiraiya. "I'll have to think more on it." He was distracted a moment later when Ahsoka straddled his waist, gently kissing his lips. His thoughts melted away, replaced with desire. He deepened the kiss, and his hands started to wander against her smooth, cool skin. She shivered and released a sigh so full of lust, Naruto nearly lost control. His breathing turned ragged, and he grabbed her neck with his lips, trailing across her collarbone before moving to the other side of her neck. She groaned, bucking her hips against his. He gasped, and he felt his canines lengthen a few millimeters. Unable to stop himself, he growled, and sunk his teeth into the flesh of her neck. Ahsoka's eyes widened, before her lips curled, revealing her own Togruta fangs. She sunk hers into his own neck, and the two groaned, trying desperately to contain themselves. Their bodies twitched occasionally, digging their fangs deeper into each other's flesh. Naruto felt tremors rack through his heart and abdomen, and he finally managed to pull out, a trail of blood tracing the exit. The liquid dripped from his fangs, before he ran his tongue over it, tasting who Ahsoka was. She managed to extricate herself as well, and the two stared at each other for a moment. Naruto grunted as he felt a slight itch as the bite marks on his neck healed over, and rubbed the spot. Ahsoka gently touched the bite marks on her neck, and brought her hand away, her fingers dripping blood. Naruto placed his hand on the wound, and felt the force flowing through him. Using one of the techniques he had read about, he managed to heal over the two holes, leaving her skin smooth and flawless. A sudden knock on his door made them jump, and Naruto quickly regained his composure. He pulled out a few holocrons, checked the writing on them, and dropped them randomly on the floor before opening up the door. He relaxed when he saw that it was Gaara. "Hey man," he said, standing aside to let the redhead in. "Come on in. We were just studying about the Old Republic." The three sat down, and pored over the devices, absorbing what knowledge they could. Naruto sighed, glad that his ruse had succeeded, and Gaara set down his holocrons to take a few notes he could study later. Ahsoka would occasionally steal a glance at Naruto, and often he met her gaze, holding it for a moment before necessity made them look away. Naruto had no doubt that he could trust Gaara, but the Jedi Code forbade the relationship he and Ahsoka had started, and the less people who knew, the less likely their thoughts would betray them. Naruto was confident that he would be able to hide his thoughts from other people, but he just didn't want to risk letting anyone know, because then that thought would be present on his mind. Another knock rang out on his door, and he opened it, finding Anakin there. He greeted them, taking a look around the room. "Ahsoka and I have to go out on assignment," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "and Master Windu has requested to speak to you, Naruto." Naruto grunted in affirmation, stretching his sore limbs as he stood. He shook Ahsoka's hand, and gave her a knowing smile as she left. Gaara got up as well, and shook as well. "Good luck with whatever mission you're about to go on, Naruto," he said, before crossing his arm over his chest in a Sand Warrior's salute. "May your blade bring you victory." Naruto performed the salute as well, before the two walked out of the room, separating a moment later. Naruto wound his way through the halls of the temple, before he finally found his master's meditation room. The door opened, and he walked through, before sitting across from his master. The man's eyes were closed, and Naruto was silent for an appropriate amount of time. "You wished to see me, master?" he asked when the man's eyes opened. Mace leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his fingers knotted under his chin. "I have a mission for you, Naruto, one that I believe only you can perform." "Tell me, what do you know of Geonosis?" he asked, staring at the young man before him. Naruto paused, recalling the information he had read in the holocrons, as well as information he had been told by some of the other Jedi. "I know that Geonosis is a strong separatist planet, and that millions of years ago, Geonosis's largest moon was hit by a comet, killing off more than 99% of the planet's native species. This resulted in an extreme example of survival of the fittest, eventually culminating into the Geonosians. The Geonosians became fond of combat, and one of their prime sources of entertainment in the Old Republic was gladiatorial combat, something that is still practiced today." Mace nodded, indicating that it was so. "From what I understand of our reports, we have discovered that the separatist leaders are going to be holding a meeting on Geonosis. The ruler, therefore, will be hosting gladiator tournaments for their entertainment. I understand that on your planet, you had a version of gladiator combat, correct?" Naruto nodded, saying, "Yes. When I took the Chunin exams, there were several tournaments. We had delegates watch for entertainment." Mace was silent for a few moments, before saying, "What I am about to assign you, Naruto, is not something to take lightly. There are many different gladiators who will participate in this tournament, whether they be slaves, athletes, or volunteers seeking fame and fortune. Therefore, I want you to pose as a slave for one of our contacts. Your appearance is as of yet unknown to the separatists, so you will participate in this tournament, and try to apprehend one of the separatist leaders. Do you understand what I am saying, Naruto? You will be alone on this mission, and you will likely die. But we cannot let this chance escape us, and you are the only Jedi here who has any experience in this kind of combat." Naruto fell silent for a while, contemplating his options. He knew that if he refused, the war could go on for much longer, possibly decades. And he would also lose the respect of every other Jedi in the Order. If he succeeded, there was a good chance he would die. He wouldn't be able to use the Force, because he would instantly be identified as a Jedi. His shinobi skills weren't well known, but if he relied on them too heavily, his powers may raise some difficult questions. As for weapons, he didn't know many of the different weapons that may be used in the reign, but he was confident in his ability to learn. "What will I need?" he asked his master. Mace smiled before standing up. "We managed to concoct a good cover-up story for you. Your planet is now at least known among some people, so he said that a slaver decided to make a trip to your planet and captured you, allowing you to use at least some of your powers. We also made up the story that you bought a lightsaber on the black market. It has happened before, so you can bring it and it won't raise too many questions. You'll have to grab some slave-type clothing." Naruto was silent for a moment, before he stood, uttering just 3 words. "As you wish." He quickly moved to his room, and once inside, sealed the door. "I have 3 hours to prepare, enter the Coruscant underground, and meet up with the contact," he thought, rummaging through his things. He pulled out a pair of simple cloth pants, and grabbed a hemp sack in the corner of his room. He pulled out one of his kunai, and quickly cut it apart, making the rough outline of a shirt. He sewed it up, purposefully making the stitchwork sloppy, and threw it on, before he grabbed a rough cloak. He packed up his kunai, scrolls, and other weapons, before he tied them to his thigh. He looked up at the clock, and saw that he had managed to kill a half-hour. He looked at a long-range communicator he had been building to practice his engineering skills, and nodded, making a decision. He quickly sat down, and created a few clones, giving them instructions on what parts to assemble. Within an hour, the job was completed, and he took a look at the finished product. It was a powerful system, and he had managed to compact the system, allowing it to be transported more easily. He pulled out his own communicator, and found a certain contact he had met in the Coruscant underground before. He sent out the signal, and waited. A figure appeared a few seconds later, his features hidden in the folds of a smuggler's cloak. His posture seemed to relax upon identifying the caller, and when he spoke, his voice was pleasant enough, despite its youth. "Naruto," he exclaimed, scratching his chin as he gazed at the young Jedi. "What can I do for you? Need me to get you some more of that strange ramen?" They chuckled for a moment, before Naruto's face grew serious. "I need you to get another communicator to my planet, for a man named Kakashi Hitaki," he said, watching for any reaction. "I'm going to be on a dangerous mission very soon, and I'm going to need to speak to my old acquaintances." The young man nodded, asking, "When do you need it there?" Naruto thought for a moment, and asked, "Is it possible for you to get it there in 3 days?" The young man scoffed, and said in mock outrage, "You shame me, good sir. What kind of smuggler would I be if it took me 3 days to deliver something to a planet that close? I could easily make it in 2. "All right," Naruto said, grinning. "Get it there as fast as you can. Usual fee?" The smuggler nodded, and asked, "When should I expect pickup?" Naruto looked at the clock, and saw that he had an hour and 20 minutes left. "I'm on my way to the underground now, so can I expect to meet you at the usual place in an hour?" The smuggler nodded, and signed off. Naruto grabbed his bag, and stuffed a few scrolls in containing various weapons and jutsu formulas. He found a blank scroll, and sealed the communicator into it, before stuffing that scroll down the neck of his new shirt. He slipped out into the hallway and jumped up to the ceiling, sticking with a bit of chakra. If this is meant to be a secret mission, he reasoned, then it would be beneficial to make sure I remain undetected. The sheer number of force sensitives in the temple would allow him to escape without being sensed, so he merely had to hope that none of the Jedi would happen to look at the ceiling hundreds of feet above. He moved through until he found a window, and pulled it open, slipping out. He closed it, and turned to see the world spread below. Hundreds of thousands of vehicles flew by beneath him, and the sun was setting, painting everything an ethereal shade in the twilight. He released the chakra holding him to the sloped roof, and slid down the ziggurat, building up more and more speed. When he came to the edge, he leapt forward, combining his chakra and the force to increase the distance. He soared over the vehicles, crossing over 1,000 meters before landing on an opposite roof. He landed in a roll, and kept running, jumping from building to building until he finally came to one that towered over the section where he would meet his contact. Without stopping, he leapt from the edge, this time using nothing to lengthen the jump, and dived, the wind roaring in his ears as he shot down like a cannonball. He reached the air lanes, and as vehicles shot at him, he used the force to twist, slow, speed up, and otherwise dodge the vehicles. Judging by how they kept going, they never even saw him. He was rapidly approaching the ground, so he used the force to slow his speed considerably, and once he hit the ground, he released a surge of chakra and force power into his system to brace himself so much that he only felt the impact he would feel if he had hopped over a fallen tree. He stood, and snuck through the dark streets, keeping to the shadows. A couple of different beings passed by him, hardly giving him a look due to his state of dress. After all, the Coruscant underground wasn't a place for the rich. Or at least, the rich who made a semi-honest living. He found his way into a seedy bar, and managed to find an unoccupied booth. The waitress walked up to him, a cute Twi'lek who looked to be about 18, and whose uniform left very little to the imagination. She gave him what would have been a charming smile, save the dead look in her eyes, and asked, "What'll it be, sugar?" "Can I get a glass of some of your Twi'lek liquor?" he asked, remembering that was one of the signals he needed for his contact to appear. "I'd need to see some ID," she replied, leaning slightly to the side so her hips stuck out. He waved his hand slightly and said, "You don't need to see any identification." "I don't need to see any identification," she repeated, her eyes and voice blank. "You will go get my drink." "I will go get you your drink," she repeated, and walked away, slipping between the crowds. He waited silently as the crowd became thicker and more boisterous as the night wore on. He took a look at the clock, and saw that the designated hour had passed. 20 minutes left, he thought, looking at the faces in the crowd. When will he arrive? The waitress set his drink down on the table, and left. He watched her leave, and when he turned back, saw the young man sitting in the booth across from him. "About time you got here, Boba. I had a little job to do before I got here," the Mandalorian clone replied, downing the drink. "Why I keep smuggling things for you when I'm supposed to be a bounty hunter is beyond me." "It could be because I pay you well," Naruto joked, passing the young man the scroll containing the communicator. "And it could also be that every time you go to my planet, you discover a new weapon or poison for your work." Boba grinned and nodded, hiding the scroll in the folds of his cloak. "That job I mentioned actually had me using one of those senbon from your planet. I designed a small launcher for it, and when dipped in poison from your planet, poison we don't have an antidote to, it makes my job much easier." "Well, we shinobi know how to kill our enemies," Naruto said, falling silent for a moment. He stood then, and said, "I have to go, Boba. I'm scheduled to leave the planet in 15 minutes, and you know me, I always have to wait until the last moment." The Twi'lek waitress hurried back over, and gave him the check, which he promptly paid. As she took the money, she leaned over and whispered in his ear, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" She pressed her S lightly against his arms to emphasize his point, and he pulled out a few more credits. He waved his hands before her eyes, and her voice and eyes went blank again as she was mesmerized. "You will take this money, and you will go home and rethink your life." She took the cash, and left the bar, the shinobi following. Naruto managed to find the platform where his handler was waiting, and waited in the shadows as men stalked around. His communicator beeped, and Naruto ducked behind a stack of crates. He pressed the button, and a cloaked figure appeared. "You Naruto?" the figure asked, and he grunted out a reply, keeping his voice down as a couple of guards, or thieves, or whatever they were walked by. "All right, now, I'm scheduled to be here for a pickup, so I want you to find a large crate and get into it. The crate has the numbers 10-11, followed by the letters ASFJ. I'll be seeing you soon." Naruto gazed at the men nearby, and saw that they were loading several crates onto the ship. He quickly cast around, searching for the designated crate. He saw a man about to pick it up, and he used the force to influence him to look away for just a moment. In a flash, he performed a teleportation jutsu to place himself inside the crate. He felt the man lift, and heard him grunt as he walked up the walkway. He was dropped inside with a less than graceful toss, and he smashed his head against the durasteel container, stars winking into existence before his eyes. He heard the man walking away, and he swore quietly, rubbing the back of his scalp. He heard the mechanical whir of the rising walk, and he sat silently in the cramped crate, waiting to be released. After about 10 minutes, he felt the jolt of the ship entering hyperspace, and the top of the crate came off. He tried standing up, and wound up rolling over the edge of the crate, landing hard on the durasteel floor. He groaned, and stared up at the person above him. His jaw dropped, and he sat up, his brow furrowed in surprise. "Iruka!" he exclaimed, and the figure dropped his hood, revealing the grinning scarred Chunin. The man pulled the young Jedi to his feet, and the two grabbed each other into a bear hug. "What the hell are you doing here?" Naruto asked, gazing at the man with wonder. The former academy teacher silently motioned for the Jedi to follow, and as they walked through the hull of the unfamiliar ship, he could tell that it was a new model. The walkways were still gleaming, and the walls were streak-free. Once he reached the cockpit, he sat down in the co-pilot's seat, and watched as Iruka sat down behind the controls, taking the wheel as if he was born in the position. "After you left," Iruka began, taking a look at the controls, checking that everything was in order. More and more ships started coming into the planet. We had slavers, smugglers, criminals, Republic and Separatist ambassadors, the works. Some people came to live on our planet, and some of our people left to live elsewhere in the galaxy. Anyway, a slaver tried taking a couple of the genin, so I wound up killing him. Unfortunately for me, he was actually a representative from a separatist planet, and they said that if I wasn't taken care of, they would bring droids to the planet. Before the business reached the Hokage, I spoke to the representative who came with him, and we came to an agreement. I swore that I would leave Coronia and that I would never return so long as the Separatists existed. Naruto sighed, staring out at the streaks of blue light zipping past. Who was the representative you made the agreement with? Naruto asked, staring at his former teacher. He took in his appearance, noting the black denim jeans, the chain belt slung across his hips, the attached leather holster holding a DL-44 heavy blaster pistol. He wore a V-neck white silk shirt, covered by a black leather vest. He wore a pair of black leather boots, resembling the old shinobi sandals they used to wear, and sitting on top of his forehead. Naruto was shocked to see the old goggles that he used to wear as an academy student, resized with a jutsu to fit the man. His name was Count Dooku, Iruka replied, and he leaned back, setting the ship's autopilot. He was gracious enough to give me some credits to get me started, just to make sure that I would never return. So, I got some clothes, got this ship, and got a job as a smuggler. Naruto nodded, not surprised. After all, he had performed some smuggling missions in his time. What kind of ship is this? He asked, looking around again. I've never seen this kind before. New model? Iruka grinned and ran his hands over the controls. It's the all-new YT-1300 light freighter, straight off the Corellian Engineering Corporation line. I've done a couple of mods, and now this baby can take out a destroyer cannon with one well-placed shot, and jump to light speed faster than any other ship out there. Naruto grinned at the man's giddy expression, and leaned back in the chair, resting his hands behind his head. Oh yeah, Iruka said, reaching into a small compartment, I got something for you. He performed a quick seal, and Naruto felt the heat of a fire jutsu before he smelled an enticing scent. His eyes went wide, his mouth began to drool, and his fingers began to twitch in anticipation as Iruka brought a steaming bowl into view. I got you ramen. Sasuke sat in a meditation position aboard the Star Courier, emptying his mind of any thought but his hatred of Itachi. He roared out in anger as he failed to use what he had heard called the Force. Punching the Durasteel wall in anger, he slumped against it, running his hands through his hair. When he and Orochimaru had murdered a Twi'lek and stolen his ship, they had fled their planet, Orochimaru out of thirst for knowledge and a method of immortality, Sasuke to find new methods to kill Itachi. They had discovered, quite by accident, a holovid recording of a Sith, displaying powers that made Sasuke envious almost instantly. Since then, he had been studying all available information on the Force, trying to show some sign that he could unlock the power. So far, his efforts had been in vain. You wish for power? Sasuke jerked to his feet, and drew his blade, whipping around to see who had spoken. He felt a chill as he saw that he was alone, yet felt a dark presence hovering over him. I can offer you the darkest secrets of the Force. He cautiously lowered his sword, and turned yet again, looking for the source. This time, however, it wasn't from fear but from intrigue. Your former friend, Naruto, is a Jedi, young Sasuke, and you have nothing. Now how is that fair? He, who was born nothing, is more powerful than the true heir of the Uchiha legacy. Sasuke's mouth curled into a snarl of rage, realizing that the voice was right. He was the last Uchiha. He deserved everything the galaxy had to offer, not some imbecile who lived like a monk just because he could. Very good, the voice said, his voice smooth. Prove yourself to me, and I will give you all the power you desire. What do you wish of me? Sasuke asked, closing his eyes. He knew by now that he would not see the man who spoke to him. He felt the man's satisfaction, and a flash of images appeared in his mind. He saw all but one of the 4 escape pods launch from the courier, before they exploded, sending the metal flying through space. Another launched shortly after, and stayed intact, turning so Sasuke could see himself inside. The courier exploded in a great ball of fire, incinerating everyone inside, and leaving any survivors to die within minutes in the cold, oxygen-free vacuum of space. Once you have done this, seek me out at the Colosseum. I am Darth Sidious, and I shall make you the most powerful Sith who ever lived. The presence disappeared, and Sasuke stood, determination in his eyes. He strode from the small room, stalking past the few people who had rented passage on the ship. He gazed at them as he passed, noting who they were. He saw a small family of Togruta, the daughter resting on the mother's lap as the father watched over them. He saw a female Wookiee entering old age, her brown fur starting to turn silver. He saw an exotic-looking blue-skinned female Twi'lek who looked down at those present. She wore fur pelts that covered up a fishnet ensemble that displayed her ass and genitals when they weren't covered by the furs. Sasuke's gaze lingered on her, and he moved on, stopping at the cargo hold. He opened the door, and found a number of seismic charges. He pulled them out, and sealed them into a scroll, before he concealed himself with a simple genjutsu. He snuck past the occupants, and reached the escape pods. He opened each, and hid them in 3 of the pods, leaving the last for himself, and set them to a remote he held. He then moved into the engine room, leaving one near the reactor core, setting it to another remote. His last task was to check on Orochimaru. He used his Sharingan to stare through the durasteel doors to the cockpit, and sighed in relief to see that Orochimaru was focused on the controls. He slid back to the hold, and released the genjutsu. He ran into view, panting and acting scared. "The reactor's gonna blow," he shouted, and the assembled people jumped into a flurry of activity. He ran them to the escape pods, and ushered the family into one, and the elderly Wookiee into another. He closed the doors before the Twi'lek could enter one, and he launched them into the void. Once they were out of range, he flipped the switch activating the charges. He watched as the pods imploded before expanding out. The woman gasped and turned to him, fear in her eyes. "What would you do to survive?" he asked, and she allowed the furs to fall to the ground, revealing her body to him. He tossed her into his pod, and climbed in after, launching the pod. When he was within safe distance, he activated the final charge, blowing his sensei to Kingdom Come. He then turned to the woman, and watched as she pressed herself against the wall to try to get away from him. He programmed the coordinates for the planet below, before he undressed, and pulled the woman's clothes from her body. She whimpered in fear, before she yelped in pain as he tore into her. Her cries continued as they descended down to the planet Geonosis below. Naruto awoke just as the ship came out of hyperspace. He turned to Iruka as the Chunin masterfully landed the ship, and said, "And now to act as your slave." Iruka nodded solemnly, and he pulled out a switch made of bark from a sakura tree. He motioned for Naruto to walk ahead of him, and the two stalked down the gangplank into the desert heat. They were instantly surrounded by Geonosians, who surrounded them, speaking in a series of clicks. Iruka responded, and Naruto raised an eyebrow in surprise as the Chunin addressed them in their own language. Iruka noticed, and shouted, bringing the switch across the young Jedi's back. Naruto stumbled to the ground, and sprawled out in the dirt as he heard the insects laughing. The Geonosians gave Iruka a small amount of credits, and hauled the boy away, Iruka watching them go. "Good luck, Naruto," the smuggler thought as he watched the young Jedi being dragged through the dirt by his arms. He stalked back up the gangplank, and quickly flew off before his face was registered through the Separatist database and he was fired on. Naruto's vision dimmed and flickered as he was dragged through the damp underground tunnels and caves, his body scraped with dirt and sand. Every now and then, his captors would smash the butts of their weapons against his face, and blood was streamed down while he saw stars. He finally came into a large domed area resembling a hive, where thousands of Geonosians shouted, clicked, and jeered at him. He felt someone cut his sackcloth shirt from his torso, before he was tossed into a large pit with steel bars blocking tunnels that led to somewhere else. Someone tossed a spear in after him, and he ran to it, quickly picking the weapon up as one of the gates was lifted. He turned, and he paled when he saw an Acklay. As the world seemed to slow down, he saw the creature's 3 eyes, its armored exoskeleton, and its 6 clawed legs. It had tough, leathery skin that was a sickly shade of greenish-brown. It lunged at him, and he dodged, its sharp teeth snapping closed centimeters from his neck. It swiped at him, and one of the barbs on its claws tore his chest. He gasped in pain, swiping the spear across the creature's back, the blade glancing off the exoskeleton. The creature roared at him in anger, and it swiped at him again. He managed to dodge, and he used the spear to vault onto the Acklay's back. As if shook and bucked, he grabbed several of its spikes to hold him in place with his left arm, while he kept jabbing with the spear in his right. The creature twisted, and its head ridge knocked him off its back, the spikes tearing his legs as he fell off. He limped a few feet away, and gazed up at the jeering insects above him. By now, his pants had been shredded to little more than shorts with dangling strips of jagged cloth, and his body was equally torn. Already his body was starting to heal, but he quickly shut off access to the Kyuubi's chakra, leaving the wounds alone. He needed to appear normal if he was to participate in the gladiatorial fights. Assuming he survived testing, the Acklay shuffled toward him, and Naruto went into a flurry of swipes and stabs, managing to nick the creature's skin in a few places, making it angry. It charged at him, and he shot out a chakra tether to a different gate, managing to lock onto it and pull himself to safety as it slammed into the pit wall. Remembering what he had learned from Jiraiya, he focused wind chakra onto the tip of the spear, and then focused his lightning chakra to cover it, to give it a little extra sharpness and give the appearance of some kind of power. I am so glad I have both natures, he thought, and he charged forward as fast as he could with torn legs. The creature turned to stare at him for a long moment, before it charged, lunging at his throat with its claws. Naruto leaned back, sliding underneath the creature's body, and jabbed the spear up, the enhanced blade easily puncturing and tearing through the soft underbelly. As he slid out from under, the Acklay collapsed, blood and intestines falling out of the jagged, smoking wound. The Geonosians fell silent for a moment, before they began cheering. Naruto raised the spear over his head, and loosed a guttural war cry. An elderly-looking man stepped out of the crowd, and the Geonosians fell silent as he raised his hands, gazing down at Naruto. The young Jedi recognized him as Count Dooku, and emptied his mind of his mission so the Sith wouldn't be able to read his thoughts. You have passed our test, slave, and will become a gladiator. What is your name? Naruto glanced at the spear in his hand, and cocked his arm back, launching it toward the Count so it embedded in the wall behind him, the shaft quivering an inch to the left of his face. As the Count's gaze narrowed at him, he proclaimed himself to those present. I am Naruto Uzumaki, son of the 4th Hokage of the Hidden Leaf in the Fire Nation, greatest of the 5 elemental nations on the planet Coronia. I am a shinobi the likes of which has never before been seen. And I swear to you, Count Dooku, that I shall fight, and those who come before me shall die. The two stared each other down, before a gate opened, obviously leading to the gladiator quarters. Naruto stepped into the darkness, and the gates closed, sealing his fate.